Welcome back to Culture Yapfest, the unserious podcast for serious fans. I'm Skullie, a fandom girly who loves to chat her shit.
And I'm Earth, a cosplayer who spends way too much time in the library.
And I'm Finch.
And let's get yapping!
Yay, let's get yapping!
Yeah, very exciting. We have our very first guest on Culture Yapfest. This is Finch. I first found your account on TikTok, and everybody should follow him. He's fantastic. Making Arcane content. And the first time I found your account, I followed because I was like, oh my god, this person is so funny. This person's hilarious. This person's doing amazing skits and, like, jokes and making me laugh. But then I stumbled upon, like, your media analysis, really diving deep into, like, the themes and the characters of Arcane, specifically your Viktor and Jayce videos. I was like, oh my god, these are so juicy. The analysis is good. It's here. And I was like, I need to have you on this podcast. So thank you so much for being here with us today.
I appreciate it so much, and I love talking about Arcane. I was so excited to be able to like talk about it off TikTok as well because I mean it's pretty much all I talk about anyways. So
Fantastic.
I appreciate it so much.
Yeah, of course. And before we get into Arcane, I need to talk about this United Healthcare CEO bullshit. The United, for those of you who don't know, are you living under a rock? The United Healthcare CEO, one of the most like evil people, I think, in the entirety of the US. This company notoriously like denying claims for like over a third of their like applicants, right? Gunned down like a fucking dog on the streets of Manhattan in broad daylight, bitch. The internet has responded in a way that has like given me hope in society again.
Yeah. I've avoided talking about it a little bit because I, number one, know that all that I have to say should not be shared with the amount of followers that I have. And number two, I fear that talking about it would only spread more information about this guy. And as much as I am very interested in the entire plot, I'd like him to disappear.
Yes.
I think he's a good. I'll just let that lie for a little bit, but I think it is. I've seen the videos. I've seen the commentary on it. It is the most insane. As a disabled person who spends a lot of my life wrestling with insurance companies, that was one of the most bizarre, but also interesting. I'm trying not to gas it up too much. I'm really trying not to be like, "Yay, CEO down." But the truth is that it's been one of those things that I've just been giggling about this entire week. Kind of reminds me of the whole billionaire and the submarines debacle.
No, literally.
Yup.
I've been that excited since the whole Ocean Gate.
It very much is. It's yeah, and I think like the universal response, because like what do you expect when you have everybody who like can barely afford groceries and shit, and you have these CEOs that are making literally billions of dollars off of other people's suffering? Rot in hell, bitch. Rot in fucking hell. Like, I have no fucking sympathy. And like at this point right now, that is the natural response. I've seen these reporters that are talking about this, and they're like the headlining reporters of various news outlets on like both sides of the political spectrum, Dem and Republican, where they're like, guys, a person is dead. I'm like, so many people are dead because of this person.
Yeah.
I
Go ahead.
I saw last night on TikTok a video, so it's a commentary about a video that Ben Shapiro had put out on YouTube trying to blame like evil leftists for celebrating that this healthcare CEO is dead. And apparently his whole comment section was full of people from across the political spectrum telling him not to make it a partisan issue and saying like, and conservatives, people who are lifelong conservatives who are coming forward and saying, I'm glad the guy's dead. Like healthcare is evil. And it's fascinating, and it sort of makes me think like, oh, we're so close to class consciousness. We're like so close. We're like right there, which is both encouraging and also very sad. Like it brings up so many feelings in me to know how many people in this country reacted to this news, with glee or indifference, and still to know like how far we have to go in terms of like making policy changes that actually benefit all of us as Americans. But also like there are genuinely some good things that have come out of this. Like for it, obviously we're not condoning murder. It's not good for people to get killed.
We would never.
If you were
Don't
to ask
murder
me,
anybody, guys.
ask me personally what I think. I read the news and went, wow, that's unsurprising to me. He had it coming. That was my thought. There are policy changes being made as a result of this, because I think the healthcare companies are scared. And this, goes back to what my game studies professor always says, which is that, like, when you play the game of chess, the pawns all together are more powerful than the king. And watershed moments like this show you how powerful the pawns can be if we all use our voices to advocate for, the world that we want to see.
I think it's really interesting too because the disabled community is notably, I love you guys, by the way, just disabled community. Before I slander you, notably one of the marginalized communities that kind of lies on both sides of the political spectrum pretty heavily. Like I'd say that the queer community, BIPOC communities tend to lean heavier left, but in my experience, disability is across the board. But because, just like you said in Ben Shapiro's comment section, we see that it's not necessarily a bipartisan issue. Some things transcend conservatism or leftism or whatever, and this happens to be one of those things. And disability does tie very heavily into this. I've seen a lot of my the people that I follow who are disability activists talk about this. It's very relevant. People are celebrating on both sides of the political spectrum, on both hard sides, like all the way over here and all the way over here. The murder of this guy in broad daylight. And again, we don't condone murder here, of course, but so many people are. And it's very fascinating and also very frustrating again, because it's a lot of these people who have been screwed over by the system over and over and over and over and over again, disabled people, they're just pointing the fingers in the wrong direction. Oftentimes it comes back to the CEOs and we point the finger at the people who are doling out the healthcare, but for them it's the libs and the left that's causing all of this. I'm trying not to talk with my hands. I know I'm supposed to be in frame.
No, you can talk with your hands.
I'm a terminal talker with my hands. I'm completely always doing.
You're in good company.
You're in good company.
No, just the response I've seen from the broader disabled community, because again, we are very divided when it comes politically. Apparently not when it comes to healthcare, which is very funny to see these people actually point the finger in the direction of people above us doling out healthcare to those of us who they deem rich enough, rather than our brothers and sisters in disability, it's nice to see the community be brought together.
Yeah.
It's
also,
yeah.
This happened. My first thought was, I'm not surprised and I'm not sad. And my second thought was like, wow, didn't Charles Dickens write this story like 200 years ago? Because literally, isn't A Christmas Carol about a guy who is so wealthy and his whole job is to exploit poor people, and then he has this basically ye old acid trip about what would happen if he died, and no one is sad, and the people that he exploited, poor and disabled people, Tiny Tim is like a classic poor disabled child, they're in a worse off place. And like the weird thing about A Christmas Carol as a morality play is that it feels like we've learned nothing from it as a society. And I think
sorry, I was going to say, it takes how many sick people dying every single year from these health insurance companies denying basic human health care versus one billionaire being gunned down in the street, which, by the way, I was about to say my favorite part of Christmas Carol is when Ebenezer Scrooge is gunned down by the ghost of Christmas future. It's on the cobblestones. Sorry.
But like low key, that is kind of what happens.
Holy fuck.
Oh my god.
They should have told the story.
That's how it should have been. They got to do a modern remake. They've done enough remakes. They can do this one thing for us.
Yeah.
We see how many stories about, kids who are diagnosed with leukemia meeting their GoFundMe. Like, it's this heartwarming story about how they were able to get healthcare because they did a lemonade stand and the community came together to raise money for them. They have insurance, and yet these terminally ill people are unable to. But one billionaire.
Yep. Yeah. It shouldn't have had to happen in the first. The lemonade stand should not be. It shouldn't have had to happen in the first place. There's been some interesting developments since this has happened, because I think it was literally the day or the morning that this guy got shot. Blue Cross Blue Shield released a very controversial policy saying that they were going to be enacting time limits on anesthesia for certain surgeries and procedures, which is so dystopian. They released this new policy so the day Brian Thompson was killed and immediately rolled it back after all of this went down. What did we learn, kids? What did we learn?
I was gonna say more CEOs take this to heart, but I doubt it. But I mean, I just, if the CEOs don't learn anything, the people definitely have. So
yes, the people have, and I think elected officials have as well. A piece of the story about the Blue Cross Blue Shield anesthesia thing that I feel like isn't getting told a lot is like how many state governors saw that and went, not in my state, no thank you. And have sort of like actively been lobbying against Blue Cross Blue Shield. Governor of New York is one of those governors. Shout out Kathy Hochul.
Amazing.
Good job. But like, this is one of those things where it's like sometimes the people make their voices known and the electeds whose job it is to listen to the people actually listen to the people. What a wild concept.
Wow.
So helpful when they do that, because the job of government, really, really the job of government is to regulate these out of control industries so that they aren't allowed to prey on people.
Yeah, public service.
In my opinion, that is what government is for.
Yeah.
And I'm gonna get on a whole soapbox about this later when we talk about Arcane because I see so many parallels, but it's very interesting.
Yeah. The other thing that was, before we close out this whole CEO business, they took down their staff website page, United Healthcare, after this happened. They took down the staff website so people couldn't see all the smiling faces of all the high-level executives.
Right.
People have been uploading and re-uploading the screenshotted page, and you can find it on archive.org and all these places on Tumblr and Twitter and everything, and I'm just like, the devil works hard, the people work harder.
We're gonna start seeing bingo cards being rolled out of CEOs and high level officials that people, it's gonna be bad. This time next year I'm gonna have a bingo.
Yeah. It's gonna be that would be horrible. That would be horrible if that happened. That'd be so condolences. The concepts of thoughts and prayers.
Deductibles, thoughts and prayers.
Yes, deductibles, thoughts and prayers. I have a note here from Earth. It says Dr. Glaucomflecken.
Oh, Dr. Glaucomflecken!
Oh, wow.
Okay, so for those of you who don't know about Dr. Glaucomflecken, this is one of my favorite TikTok content creators. He is, I believe, an ophthalmologist, but he has such a wide knowledge of medicine and medical industries, and he makes these amazing skits sort of parodying the healthcare industry. He posted a video in response to this news sort of saying, it's not good that someone died, but also it's good that we're talking about healthcare policy and public discourse. And one of the things that I hear all the time about my videos is that they reach people and tell them how the healthcare industry actually works in a way that's digestible so that they can then go out in the world and advocate for policy change. And that's so fucking cool.
Yeah.
And it's one of those things that sort of reminds you the internet is both, the problem and the solution a lot of the time. Anyway, go give Dr. Glaucomflecken a follow. He also has a podcast that he does with his wife about medicine if you're interested in medicine. We'll put his TikTok handle in the comments, and so you can go check him out. But highly recommend his videos. They're very funny and also educational.
Very few people, I feel are going to read a dense article on healthcare policy and things like that. It's so much more accessible to and it is kind of sad in our society that we've gotten to this point, but it's just sort of it's so much more accessible to learn things through memes and jokes and humor.
Yeah.
But we even see that in people like John Oliver or Jon Stewart or whatever. When they talk about topics that are much heavier, they use humor to kind of buffer it a little bit, but also make it more digestible and understandable with hypotheticals, with hyperbole. Satire, hyperbole, yes, yeah. Et cetera, et cetera. We talk a lot about fandom on here, as this is a fandom podcast, and I found something on Tumblr which I thought was so cool. There is a previously extinct native language that has sort of been revitalized on AO3, which is so cool.
That's
Just
amazing.
to give you the long and short of it, Chinuk Wawa, which is an indigenous language here in America, was declared extinct in the early 2000s, and then undeclared after approximately 650 native speakers came forth, and then they instituted language learning programs. So it's started to kind of like come back. But one of those speakers is out here writing Game of Thrones fan fiction on AO3, A Song of
Wow.
Ice and Fire fan fiction on AO3. This person has written 357 works of A Song of Ice and Fire fan fiction in Chinuk Wawa. I think that's really fucking cool.
Oh God,
That rocks.
that's the most amazing thing ever, and it's especially funny knowing that because it's so close to like it's declared extinction and then being reinstated. I mean, it's very possible that this person's works are going to be archived as sort of like way to keep
Right.
the language alive. I learned a lot about this in my anthropology class I took last semester. I did a research paper on Native American culture within the U.S. A lot of these languages have gone extinct, and it has become such like a concerted effort in certain groups, but like also not nearly enough. The fact that
I know.
human ingenuity knows no bounds.
Truly. It's so cool. And then there's so many people on Tumblr that are like, I want to learn this language now. I want to read these fanfics. And like that kind of excitement, I feel like only exists in fandom. Like it is just like,
Oh,
yeah,
yeah.
let me learn a whole new language so I can read this fanfiction. It made me smile so much, and I think it's so cool because I you're absolutely right. I'm like, what if this A Song of Ice and Fire fanfic gets like archived as like important literature to preserve this language? Like that is so cool.
Somebody might. It's very, especially like these like native groups that are trying to actively preserving the language. I'm sure they have them on like little hard drives. This person's fan fiction kind of reminds me of somebody. This is kind of niche, but somebody won an art competition, and their very beautiful painting was displayed in the White House for like however long. It was a hanagram painting, like Hannibal and Will Lecter.
Oh
That's
my
what the
God.
painting. It was like in the White House. It might still be there. It kind of reminds me of how fandom, the passion for fandom transcends like just media. It
Yeah.
goes, it bleeds into our culture and also
Mhm.
history.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just so fascinating.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I thought you guys
Yeah.
might like
Cultural production. Cultural production is cultural production. Doesn't matter where it comes from or what it's about. And significance is socially constructed. Go forth and make your weird shit. More
I
power
love
to
nerds.
you.
Period.
Fuck yeah.
Yeah. I've been going through the old Lord of the Rings movies, and
The old Lord of the Rings movies. Oh no.
They're
well,
all old to
listen,
hell.
listen. That was a Freudian slip. I'll be real with you. That wasn't intentional for me to say that.
Real.
But
Oh my God.
listen, we were like, you probably weren't even born yet, Finch, when those came out.
I don't even know. Me and Cass are watching Rings of Power right now. When I hadn't even watched the Lord of the Rings movies when I met him, and now it's like a yearly thing we do. Like we watch The
Oh,
Hobbit first, and then we go through the Lord of the Rings.
I
Yeah.
love
I have to like
that.
pen a weekend out every year for like 9 hours
That's
movie.
so cute.
They're so good.
It's adorable.
They're so good. Do you want the extended editions?
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. And he has to like every single time. Every single time, by the way, he has to like. I know everything. I'm like, I know. I know you know because I also know because you told me 3 times now.
Because
Because
you
you know what? We're going on our 4th year.
But did you
And you
know?
know what? For the next 70 years, that's what it's. Did you know? I did in
That's true
fact
love.
know.
But
Did
did you
in
know when
fact
he kicked
know
the
that
helmet?
Viggo Mortensen broke his toe.
But did you know
Yep.
when he kicked the
I
helmet?
was just- he will start looking at me 10 minutes before that scene comes up. He'll be like, "Do you have something to say?" He's like, "No."
That is
I'm like,
me as well.
I
I
think you
fear.
do.
That's so funny. Anyway, oh my God.
That's beautiful.
But I was watching through those old movies. Apparently, this is the lipstick that
Oh, you have the
Arwen
black
wore.
honey?
I have the black honey.
Arwen
I didn't even know I had
uses
it.
Cass
There you
uses
go.
the same thing because
Love.
he's a nerd.
Yes.
It's cute.
Yes.
It's
It's
cute.
It is
beautiful.
cute.
Yeah.
It's a universally flattering color.
Yeah, it's really lovely. So we gotta get serious, gang. We gotta get
All right.
serious. We gotta dig deep.
To transition us a little bit into the serious corner, Normally what I do for this segment is I go to the library and do a bunch of research, but I feel like today we're having like a pretty cool critical media conversation, and so I wanted to start with like a little bit of an academic critical reading of Arcane as a story, and talk a little bit about like the patterns that I observe in Arcane and the sort of like systems and powers at work in the world of the show, because like at its core, this is a show about systems and powers and how human beings come into contact with those systems and powers, and like what does to the trajectory of their lives. So thing one that I feel like is really important to say about Arcane is that this is a show about the stratification of society, and structural violence that reinforces the stratification of society. In this particular story, I see it really as based on geography and class. We don't get a whole lot of backstory for why Piltover is Piltover and why Zaun is Zaun, other than that they're twin cities, and you know, one has money and one doesn't, and the one that doesn't has to deal with all of the sort of environmental pollutants and fallout from not having those resources. There are the ghosts of a lot of contemporary American dynamics in here, including unequal social determinants of health because of environmental pollution, overcrowding, others. When we talk about social determinants of health, like what that means is the things in the society, the environment around you that have a direct impact on your health as an individual. A lot of people think of health as sort of like this nebulous thing that isn't socially impacted or socially constructed, but it totally is. Just to give you an example, like part of the reason why we see communities of color in the United States having worse health outcomes from time to time is because of practices of redlining that place those neighborhoods next to power plants and factories and parts of society that produce a lot of pollution. Think about Flint, Michigan as an example, right? And redlining is basically just like a racist practice that leads to that kind of stratification of society. There's not anything inherent to to being a certain. It's like it's the conflation of race and class that lead to these like very, very real consequences. And we see this in Arcane, not so much along the lines of race, which I'm going to talk about in a hot second. In this country, we see it very much along the lines of race. And I feel like that's sort of important to think about when we do a reading of Arcane, and when we think about racial dynamics in Arcane. In this stratification of society, we also see something that we don't see a lot in an American context, which is this like heavily guarded borders, struggle for territory, and the role of occupation and imperialism in maintaining stratification. For me, when I watched Arcane, as someone who has traveled to Israel, Palestine, is the reality, like the militarized reality and occupation that occurs in a stratified society, the ghosts of that are all over Arcane. And, you know, it's not a one-to-one comparison. It's not a one-to-one allegory, because in the conflict in Israel-Palestine, we see racial implications, we see religious and ethnic implications, we see genuine struggle over land, people who feel that they have a right to be on that land, and we don't know about the backstory in Arcane in that same way. But the type of violence that gets portrayed and the anger and rage at being relegated to like second class citizens feels similar to me as someone who's been there and seen that like in our real world. So let's transition really quickly out of that to talk a little bit about the racial and gender dynamics that I see in Arcane. These don't neatly map onto what we see in our world. The key example that I pulled of this is that like no one bats an eye in Arcane that a Black woman is in charge of the military and that she's like the main antagonist of season 2 because of her power. And that speaks volumes about what the role of race and gender is in this world. So it's interesting because the writers seem to have sort of taken away the primacy of race and gender, and it leaves us in this kind of interesting like closed system void where we get to look at how intersectionality works on multiple levels. Because when you take away the primacy of race and gender, where do people draw their social power from? And so that really foregrounds ability and class privilege and sort of legacy status among society, right? The power of a family name is a huge thing in the world of Arcane. And I just think it's important that as we sort of examine the characters in this world, this is a thing that we think about. I think particularly when it comes to remembering like who is listened to, who has social clout and whose ideas get to be the ideas that everyone acts on, and who is discredited and who is sort of relegated to the side, pushed to the side, who has to resort to desperate measures to make their voice heard in this society. Almost always that distinction runs along a line of class. And that's kind of fascinating because our real world doesn't always work that way. And I think it's kind of an interesting point to think about. So the other huge thing that I see in Arcane is this like conversation around the overreach of technology and how that affects our society in a whole bunch of ways. Season 1, we get this from this narrative of like a distrust of traditional ways of knowing and like the slow progress of academia. What we get between Jayce and Viktor in season 1 is this like narrative of scrappy dudes who are reinventing the world from inside a garage, which echoes the Silicon Valleys of the world. These guys who are gonna change the world, goddammit. The difference being that we identify with Jayce and Viktor because of their like genuine struggles as characters. I'm gonna get back to that in a hot second. So that's season 1. And then season 2, we have a couple of interesting little like tropey things going on that, first of all, technology going out of control, outward military threat as the kind of deus ex machina that gets the human beings to stop fighting amongst themselves and become one people. And this is my biggest issue with the show Arcane, actually.
Yeah.
Because because like this is sort of how they resolve the problem. That at the beginning of the series we have this massive problem, right? We've got this stratified society, people are really divided, and you know, all of the toxic waste is getting dumped onto half of the people. And so they're fighting, obviously, for very good reason. And the solution to this problem is that technology gets out of control and we have this like outward military threat, and then all the people have to work together to defeat the threat, and then everything's like hunky-dory. I did not see in the end of Arcane enough dismantling of the systems that cause these problems to feel comfortable with the way that the show like, is it business as usual? Does it matter that Sevika is given a seat on the council, or is that just temporary? You know, we don't know that things will get better for the people of Zon, and that really bothers me. Especially because of the kind of glorification of the common enemy trope, which is like a really classic movie trope. This happens a lot in alien movies, right? That like having a common enemy, which is the alien, gets all the people to work together. But like how that plays out in our real world is that alien is just a cipher for immigrant.
Right.
Or alien is just a cipher for Jew.
Those
or some or some other like scapegoated population. We didn't talk about Wicked at all in the beginning of this podcast, but if you've been to see Wicked, you'll know that like the animals are the scapegoat for everything that's going wrong in society, and the wizard chooses to make the animals the scapegoat to bring everyone together. So like this is a real political technique that people use in the real world to divide people, and that fucks me up a little bit inside. I love Arcane for a whole bunch of reasons. This is my biggest issue with it as a show.
I've been meaning to talk about this specifically, but I have not been able to really wrap up my feelings and thoughts on it in like a 1 or 2 minute video, so I haven't spoken on it yet. But yeah, that exactly was my biggest grievance with season 2 and Arcane in general. It felt watching the barricades go up in the first 1 or 2 episodes, watching like police and military violence being enacted on citizens of Zon for quite literally just having blue hair, an act of resistance that was nonviolent, showing people being vetted through those gates, like it being like a constant surveillance type of thing, and then watching
Yes.
those same barricades be pulled down in episode 6 or
Yeah.
8, I don't remember,
Mhm.
only for the citizens of Zon to come fight for Piltover was
It,
the most disheartening and disappointing thing about Arcane for
Really
me. Just
fucked
in
up.
general,
yeah.
that
Yes.
imagery, that story that they told there, it felt like to me, I say this all the time. They had me in Act 1. They really lost me in Act 2. They brought it back around a little bit in Act 3, but it felt like the story that they were telling in Act 1 and Act 2 and entire season 1 was actually a different story than the one that they ended.
Yeah.
Yep.
Which was very frustrating.
Yeah.
I
No.
completely agree.
Yeah.
And I'm glad you said that. Having been through a highly militarized checkpoint as a person of privilege, right? Like as the person that they let through the checkpoint because I have an American passport and I'm, with travel agents who go through the checkpoint all the time. It's an experience that you don't forget. It is like it is a totally dehumanizing surveillance state type of situation, and for the people who don't walk through with that level of privilege, it's like a harrowing reality of daily life that contributes to the structural violence of apartheid, imperialist violence, genocide. It's super duper fucked up, and it's really extra fucked up that like the solution that taking down the barricades is like, why don't you come and fight for us, because
But
that's gonna go so well.
guys,
It really
but
I
we've
guys.
grew
seen
up on
that go
a
so well in American history. Like all of the people who were interned in World War II, Japanese people who were in internment camps and then went to fight for the US, and
yeah,
then came home to like basically no
nothing.
recognition. So fucked
I
up.
actually grew up on a military base, and I understand what you mean by going through militarized checkpoints with as a person of privilege. But literally, I mean, to get in and out of base, you would have to roll through these checkpoints with men in full military gear with full machine guns, checking your IDs, checking the back of your cars. Like it was a casual daily occurrence for me. And then when people got on the base, which was very rare that this happened, they would set out like a I want to say citywide, but they're like little towns,
Mm-hmm.
but instead of it being normal that we all live in a caste system, I'm not going to get into it. Being on a military base, they'd lock the whole thing down, and they'd be
Yeah.
like, "Someone's on base." And I'm like, "You mean a teenager jumped the fence and then got caught by security cameras
Right.
because they realized they weren't where they were supposed to be? So you sent dogs after him? Yeah, yeah, I'm sure it was a big threat."
Yeah.
Like seeing that in Arcane, and then also having experienced that in real life. And also,
Yeah.
if you're a person of color or transgender or visibly queer or different in any way, and you go through airport security, I mean, it's not the same, but
Similar.
Mm-hmm.
yeah, taken aside every single time I go through airport security, I get taken aside. Believe it or not, it's not racial profiling, but because they can't tell if I'm a boy or a girl, so they got to pat me down. I've very quick tangent. I promise I'll shut up. I've been.
No, don't shut up.
What do
Don't.
you got
This is
in
this.
No,
here?
shut up.
Don't shut
What
up.
do you want? My tits. This guy literally took his hands off me like he had been burned. I was like, can we go? You're gonna check my hair next? Anyways,
Yeah.
it was very
Yeah.
similar to that. It was like I was watching the Jinxer get like shoved up against the wall. I was like, hey, that's me getting molested by airport security every single time.
Yes. No, literally, like every marginalized
Seriously.
person who has been through any sort of like security theater panopticon has had an experience like this. And if you haven't read Panopticon by Foucault, Michel Foucault, he's a very famous French philosopher. This is like a great foundational piece of academic reading to help you understand how like violent surveillance systems work. They're all kind of the same, and they operate based on the same principles of surveillance and discipline.
I'll add
So
that in the
I so
description.
appreciate that.
No, yeah.
So appreciate that anecdote.
Yeah.
This is like one of my special favorite blorbos to talk about. So technological determinism is this idea that technology drives our society. Like that is the thing that drives our society either for good or for ill. And it's a concept that sci-fi loves to play with because it's thing that humans like rightfully have a lot of anxiety about. And the technological determinism inherent to tech is such a driving factor of this story, and I think it's fascinating because it weaves in a whole lot of complicated discourses, and I'm excited to hear what you guys think about it. But basically, like, tech is the thing in the universe that will either save or kill us all. TM. We see things like MacGuffins like hex tech present in other sort of like science fiction hero narratives. The arc reactor in the sort of Marvel Avengers universe, this idea of Tony Stark's warm light for all mankind to share, sort of has a similar emotional, affective, manipulative side to it the way hex does. It's like a good side and a bad side. For me, the interesting thing about hex tech specifically is that it reflects a lot of the discourse going on right now about artificial intelligence and like our sort of fear that artificial intelligence is going to destroy the world. I don't think this fear is entirely unfounded. There's a reason why when we see the world in Arcane without hex tech, it's a better world. Like the show clearly wants us to walk away with the impression that like technology is dangerous. And what we in the Academy always say is that like technology itself isn't always dangerous. We just need to pay attention to the social realities that surround technology and its development so that like we don't ruin our planet and, you know, drive ourselves into a future that like we can't fix.
Somebody's studying, computer information systems, which is like a very basic, just career-driven field. But I want to be going into computer science in the near future. AI is such like a focal point of quite literally anybody who's doing technology right now. Like that is what we're all focused on, what we're all have to learn about. And it really is interesting because a lot of people's who don't understand technology very much, which to be fair, I feel like one of those people, even though I almost have my degree, you start learning about technology and then you realize how you know nothing about technology.
It's a rabbit hole. The more you know, the less you realize you know.
Yeah, it for me, the fear about AI kind of got less the more I learned about it. And then as I continued to learn about it, that fear just went right back up. It's not, I think tech is very interesting because in the MCU, Tony Stark's technology kind of like has a mind of its own. It has its own consciousness, just like Hex does. It is insinuated that the Arcane has a mind of its own, has its own agenda, but it's not as explicit, which I think is interesting because that's more kind of like how AI works in our universe. It won't be robots coming to life and killing all the humans that destroys the universe. It will be the absolute havoc, corruption, and destruction that other humans are capable of using AI for. That will could ultimately, you know, bring about destruction to everything. But I think it's very interesting. It's like it's not the arcane existence, which is a natural occurrence itself, that is wrong. It's humans using it in a way that corrupts and destroys.
Yes, 1,000% yes. And I so freaking appreciate having your perspective on this as a computer scientist, because when I talk to computer scientists, this is what they say, right? It's not that the technology is inherently bad. It's that in the hands of humans who want to dominate and control society, sometimes for reasons that they think are good reasons, shit gets out of control. And we end up destroying the planet. It's not the technology that's inherently bad. And this brings me so smoothly to my next point, which is that like hex tech, like our, you know, sort of contemporary technologies, gets greenlit too soon because politicians who are not scientists take an interest in it for the military. Right? Because Mel takes an interest in hex tech as a conduit to making weapons. This is a real thing that happens in the real world. Most technological advancement that gets greenlit has roots in being funded by the military. And by the way, this also includes video games. The first video games were designed to teach people how to fight good, how to fly planes, how to think tactically about doing things in war. Part of the problem with technology is the way that it gets co-opted and deregulated by government entities who want to use it because of its relationship to power.
Paralleling real life, that is so, again, prevalent if you're somebody who is in again, I'm in computer information systems, a very low level basic. If you're in any part of technology whatsoever, even peripherally, this is something that you've had to like come to terms with if you care at all morally about it. Every major technology company, every single one of them, software, hardware, firmware, stuff that goes on behind the scenes, stuff that is like right up on your face all of the time. You go looking into what they do, what they create, they could create like healthcare stuff and they could give it out for free on the side of the corner. And you're like, wow, this company's amazing. You go searching through what else they create, it's weapons, 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 weapons,
Yeah.
weapons. And often, a lot of the time, their main thing that they create, that they like roll out, is actually a part of the weapons that they're creating. Like oftentimes, you know, something that I hear a lot, go into drones, become a drone pilot. You want to learn how to pilot drones? I don't want anything to do with drones. I don't want to touch them. I don't want to go near them. I don't want to code for them. I want to destroy every single drone that I've ever looked at or even heard of. I don't, stop telling me to pilot drones. This stuff is used all over the place. And a lot of the videos that you watch on YouTube and all of the things that are on TV right now, a lot of these images were shot with drones. I still want literally nothing to do with them because I could have nothing to do with the creation, piloting, but my involvement, the information that I give forward, the practice that I do with these, they will be used and packaged and corrupted in some way so that in some other country, the drones there can be improved based on. It's very difficult and it's very, very interesting that Arcane was able to translate it so well. And I think it's also very interesting. I'll shut up here in just one second. Mel is such a charismatic and interesting and nuanced character that so many people want to completely excuse her actions and her involvement in this when she did have a ton of involvement in creating Hextech and corrupting Hextech.
Period.
Obviously, it wasn't all her fault. But it's very interesting.
It's a system. It's a system.
Mhm.
Yeah, like once you get implicated in the system in some way, either because you know you're a programmer trying to make a living, or you know you're a politician trying to get a leg up, it's very hard to see the barriers of the container that you have found yourself implicated in. But like this thing about healthcare and like tech companies sort of like, look at our shiny healthcare thing. This is also a thing with Hextech because of the way it conflates technological progress and scientific progress as like a fictional thing because it's nukes and medicine.
When they were rolling out one of the original, like, oh, we're showing our technology to the professor, they talk about the gauntlets and the hammer, which are both supposed to be used for mining, and that's like lowest of low kind of base level. It's your average minimum wage job in Zon. So under the guise of helping people, they quite literally have created weapons. It's just like what I'm talking about in like real life with these drones that, oh, you can go drone pilot for TV. And no, I know what this hammer is being used for. It's not to mine stuff. You're shooting kids in a shimmer factory. Stop doing that. Sorry. I just
no,
really interesting.
Period.
Don't,
that's like accurate.
Yeah. And also
and like
don't apologize. Don't say you're gonna shut up.
I had such
you're here.
Open beef with Jayce for the longest time. Before season 2, I got pretty popular on TikTok, for those who don't know, by making a joke about being Jayce Lover 69, like that guy who's obsessed with Judy Hop. He's like, his whole thing was being a Judy Hop. So that's what his username was. I changed it for a while to Jayce Lover. I did not like that man, and I was very open in my hatred of him.
Yeah.
Always thought he was hot, but that's because he's 2D.
Oh my god, I remember you changed your username.
It's just really funny that they.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead. I was just gonna say, I remember when you changed your username and it was right before Act 2 dropped, and then Jayce murdered Viktor, and then you were like, I need to defend myself.
I can't
like,
change it for another 6 days.
Yes. I felt so bad. I was like, oh my god.
I'm gonna get to that. I'm gonna get to that in a minute. Jayce pisses me off so much. But like so ironic that like many of the problems that Hextech is trying to solve, and like that Jayce is presenting Hextech as like this amazing thing that's gonna change the progress of the city, but the problems are caused by the social stratification of society, and we wouldn't even need Hextech if we could actually take care of people. And I don't see Jayce proposing a way, and this is my soapbox, right? This is why STEM alone does not cut it, right? This is why we need social scientists to say to the technologists and the scientists who are like, my thing is going to change society forever, and like my technology, blah blah blah. This is why we need the social scientists to say, but have you considered there's another way? without blowing everything up. We could fix this without blowing everything up. Because we
That or we
totally
just need to
could.
stop letting cis men be scientists.
Period.
Yeah.
You get them out.
Yeah.
Not allowed to be STEM anymore.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Go take an art class or something.
Go take an art
Yeah.
class, take a philosophy
No.
class, think about your
Actually,
feelings.
never mind. We don't need any more Basquiat clones. I'm done with that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Guarantee you that Jayce has never read Foucault, and it shows on so many levels. Everybody should read Foucault. But anyway, the last
down.
sort of like point that I wanted to say about technology is that, and I'm really interested, Finch, to hear what you think about this. That technology, we have this narrative in society that sort of shows up in Arcane, but is kind of problematized in Arcane in a way that I think is interesting. That technology is the solution for illness and disability, and therefore the solution to all social problems. And
Right.
techno-futurists, people who believe that like technology is the future and it will solve everything and everything will be good, want to believe that in the future there will be no disability, but that's the opposite of true. Straight up, it's the opposite of true. This is a very good book that everybody should read. I'm gonna hold it up for you. It's called Against Technoableism, by Dr. Ashley Shue, who is a professor of disability studies at, I believe, Virginia Tech. And one of the things that she says in her book is that the future is disabled for individuals as we age, but also for the planet, and for society writ large, because of what human beings are doing to the environment, because of new diseases, because of the way that society evolves. So the question becomes then, like, how to not about eradicating disability, not about using technology to eradicate disability, but using technology to accommodate each other, to accommodate ourselves, and to accommodate the planet. And like the numero uno thing that she argues for in this book towards doing this is to listen to the voices and perspectives of disabled people. And one of my big issues with Jayce is that he's working on this project with Viktor, and sometimes they're working together, but like really what happens at the beginning of season 2 is Jayce just decides to like merge Viktor with the Arcane blob. He just sort of makes that call on Viktor's behalf, and sets into motion this like whole series of events, and I just find that fascinating and disappointing.
What you were saying about technofuturism and so many people being convinced that the future is completely able-bodied, that they're going to eradicate disability in the future because of technology. Like, for example, Elon Musk and his Neuralink chip, by the way.
Yep.
I hate that man and everything he does, but the Neuralink chip makes me genuinely need to go somewhere padded, like into a room that with locked doors, padded cell, possibly just it angers me in a way that is inhuman. But so many people's ideas of disability is completely and utterly skewed by the world that we live in, the society that we live in. Now, I would like to say, up until a certain point, disability is caused by society. And I think that the way that quite literally, like the way that our school system is set up, the way that our healthcare systems are set up, the way that jobs are set up, the way that the outdoors is that our infrastructure, especially in America, but all over the world, that causes inaccessibility, which exacerbates disability. I would rather have ramps built everywhere with technology than have my legs taken away and to be given brand new legs. And that's the problem, is that these people who insist that in fantasy shows that there shouldn't be any disabled people because fantasy and technology, magic can cure all disabilities and that everybody would want to be cured, frustrates me because they are looking at the person and saying, what can I fix about you, instead of looking at the society and saying, what can I fix about the society? I've mentioned this before, but I am mostly housebound at this point. I'm no longer like mostly bedbound, which I'm very grateful for. The reason I'm mostly housebound is not because I am so disabled. Now, I am so disabled. The thing is that more than half of the buildings in I'm just going to say state. I'm not even going to go countrywide, because the more rural you get, the more inaccessible, but also cities are nightmares too. I can't enter half of the buildings, more than half, when I'm outside in my wheelchair. And it frustrates me that people look at that situation and they would rather say, how can we cure you, than for the society? You want to talk about technology being the future, which it's not. It's a tool. It has always been a tool, just like a hammer is a tool, just like a rock can be if you use it in the correct way. But it can also be used to kill people. But at the crux of it, you can't cure disability because you can't cure death. Every human
Right.
will age. Every human at one point in their life will become disabled. Now, a lot of people classify disability in different ways. And I do think at the end of the day, it is up to the individual person, however they would like to identify. If you're in a wheelchair and you don't identify as disabled, good for you. But a lot of people, especially as they age, have more and more issues with not only their physicality, but accepting their physicality. And it's because their entire life as an able bodied person, they have never even considered it a possibility when it is, in fact, a reality for every single person. And I avoid talking about this on my TikTok because so many people are not receptive
Yeah.
to
Yep.
this idea. And it's not just an idea. Again, my mother is getting older. She's been able bodied her entire life. She now talks about it with me. We have a lot of similar issues. And now it's more of a disability for me because I'm younger and it does affect me more. But the fact that she can't read all of the time without glasses, that is a disability. And that happens to everyone as we get older. And because nobody considers it in wider society, it's just not considered. A lot of people's first time spending any actual amount of like time thinking about disability or disabled people or disabled characters is watching Arcane, which is why, even though I do enjoy doing analysis videos, I tend to kind of hold people's hands and walk them through it because genuinely they go outside, they don't see anything wrong.
Hmm.
But when I go outside, I see, oh, there's a curb there. Somebody's in a disabled parking space when they shouldn't be. I can't enter that building. Of this hospital appointment that I have to go to, yes, it's accessible, but I have to get to the third floor all the way over there. And if my wheelchair is not working, then I can't even go to a doctor's appointment. So it's like until you become disabled or until you have friends that are disabled or loved ones, you are not thinking, and I've been going on for too long, actively about the world around you. And they also view disability as some sort of curse or punishment, which is very frustrating when it's not. It's human. It's the most human thing, I think, is sickness and illness and disability. And it's also very frustrating, though, because this is something I've always wanted to talk about, but I haven't really found the right words to yet. At the end of the day, the disability community is a marginalized community, but unlike other marginalized communities, the only thing we have in common is our shared weakness, our shared illness. And because of that, people view us differently than they view other marginalized communities. Now, do they hate all marginalized communities regardless? Of course they will. But generally, these days we can celebrate, being a person of color, we can celebrate pride, we can celebrate these differences we have. And I'm, again, not like pretending that these things are even close to being fixed or being even better in general. But disability justice has stayed so stagnant because the idea that the only way disability can exist within our society is as it is now. I will keep going back to the thought of people looking at me and they'd rather imagine a world where I can have new legs and run around freely than imagine a world where there's just a fucking ramp
Yep.
at every building. Why would you
Yes.
rather take somebody, like even in your head, take somebody apart, put them back together, put them through years and years and years of like physical, emotional, mental? You could just build a ramp. And again, that's a very simple way of looking at it, but it's more of like an allegory. To me, it's very frustrating that they built these gauntlets and these hammers and all of these amazing things with Heck Tech. They never built anything for Victor. They never built
Right.
him a crutch or a leg brace with anything Hex Tech related. He was a creator in that for the longest time. You can see Jayce's creations being the hammer, being the gauntlets. I mean, of course, Victor had something to do with it. Well, Victor, he has the hex claw, the hand. That even is more of like metaphorical in terms of what they're going for. Victor's, in a way, is an aid for people who are not able to do things on their own, and so is Jayce's. But I feel like I don't know. It's very interesting their characters and the way that they help people, but at the same time, I think
Mm-hmm.
that even Victor is shown to be looking to cure his disability instead of curing the societal problems.
Yep.
And of course, he's terminal, so that there's differences there. There's definitely like, oh, he wants to live, not just get better.
Hmm.
But I mean, the gray, the chemicals in Zon are what made him sick in the first place.
Right.
And
Right.
instead of making air purifiers or something along those lines, they just continue to make things for workers. And it's like, I don't know. That's one of the most frustrating things to me is that Victor as a character was never shown to until he becomes godlike, doesn't end up helping anybody in Zon directly, which I think is kind of a little bit of a character snipe there. But I also think that they were trying to shove so much into Arcane,
Yeah.
they couldn't
Yeah.
show it. They just had to imply it.
Yeah.
I so totally agree with you. It's so first of all, if you are if you're not a disabled person and you would like to raise your awareness of what it's like to be a disabled person in American society, read this book. It is very, very short. The sub headline is Rethinking Who Needs Improvement. And many of the points that she makes in this book so echo what you've been saying, Finch, that like the
And
social
also,
model of disability is so violent. Yeah, yeah.
if you want to expand your knowledge, and this is something I say all of the time, but especially if you're an able-bodied person, if you don't have the time or you just don't care enough to sit down and read, I get it. Follow people. You're
Yeah.
already
Yeah.
scrolling on social media. Follow differently disabled, like not differently abled. I've never used that word, but genuinely follow people who have mobility issues. Follow people who have visual impairments, who are deaf, who are autistic, who are intellectually disabled. That getting firsthand accounts from these people is the most important way to like become more aware of the things around you. And if Arcane has given me anything other than a platform, it's the way that people actually consider and think about disabled people just within their lives because of Arcane. And that is something that is so incredibly beautiful. And I love Arcane. I will never criticize that part about Arcane is the amount of awareness it has raised for disabled people just in general because they dared to have a couple main characters who are physically disabled, physically visibly disabled.
Yeah.
And again,
Yeah.
everybody, I love my invisibly disabled people, love y'all. I love people who are, this is kind of a weird thing, but like mentally, emotionally, neurologically disabled. I think those things are beautiful, but especially in media, it is so deeply important to have visibly, physically disabled characters
Yeah.
be represented because that is not something we've ever had before. And usually it is the tropiest shit I've ever seen in my life.
Yeah. I mean,
Arcane does
Period.
it different.
I mean, as
Yeah.
like I feel like very much a way to explain this to people who maybe aren't disabled is like, or but people that are queer, it means so much more on screen to just see two gay people kiss than it is
Yeah,
to like have queer coding in a story. Like imagine it
exactly.
from that perspective.
A lot
Diversify
of
your feed. This is
Yes.
the thing we're
We
mhm.
talk
always
about
telling
this
people. Like
all the time.
every episode, I feel like we tell people this. Diversify your feed. It's doable. You can do it. It's not that hard.
And I'm tired of people complaining about how, oh, well, I'm just not interested in disability justice. Okay, well, there are disabled people who draw. There are
Yeah.
disabled people who make podcasts. There are disabled people who do cosplay and sketch content, who are comedians, who are this, that, and the third. It's not all about disability justice and activism and
Yeah.
speaking. You just don't want any disabled person within your life or peripheral because it makes you sad to look at them and think about them.
And that's
Whatever
fucked
you're
up.
Yeah,
interested
it's
in,
fucked up.
there's a disabled person out there doing it, and they're doing it better than you. So go follow
Period.
them and look up
Yes.
to them, listen to them,
Yes.
Yeah.
And follow Finch because
as it's
his
coming
account is
for you,
amazing. Yeah.
one way or another. 10 years from now or 20.
Yeah.
I thought I was going to have at
40.
least 10 more years until I had to start using a wheelchair.
Yep.
Yeah. For real. Stop telling yourself that you're gonna shut up because I want you here to talk so badly.
Okay,
And I'm gonna make you talk some more if that's okay.
that's totally fine
Yes.
with me.
I
One thing about me is I like to.
yeah.
You like to yap.
Hey, this
Good thing
Mhm.
that's what this podcast is called.
literally we're here to yap him. I want to hear more about your experience, like seeing Viktor on screen, your thoughts on the way his character was portrayed and written, and
Mhm.
then I'd love to hear also about like fandom response and like what you have seen in your comment sections and like what
Right.
that experience has
Yeah.
been like.
So something you said at the very beginning, and I'm going to use this gesture around because it helps me keep track of my thoughts. ADHD is terminal for me. At the very beginning of this episode, is you said that race and gender have kind of been. I'm not as smart as you, so I'm not going to say this as eloquently, but it's kind of been put to the side in terms of
Mm-hmm.
like how it affects the characters that operate within this world. So I often refer to it as like the media vacuum. Like when we look at Arcane within a vacuum outside of our real world, I think that the disability representation, specifically in the first season, is fantastic. I think I've never seen anything like it. And I genuinely love what they did with Victor's character. I love the way that they introduce him. I love the way that they showed his chronic illness, his terminal illness getting worse. over time. I love the way that they do not comment on it, not openly at least. I love that they show Viktor struggling himself alone a lot of the time. Outside of the vacuum, it can be very difficult because Viktor's character arc does follow a couple of tropes which I personally will always hate because they are just so common within disabled characters. For me, I've broken this down before to my partner. It's a little bit hard to memorize exactly what I was saying. Viktor's character, that people like him, characters within media, shows, TV, books, etc., usually go one of two routes, and it's either become the evil dictator or the monster, or they're just there to become the victim. And I was very scared because in season one, it seemed like Viktor was the victim. And I was terrified that he was going to die and it was going to be the thing that woke Jayce up to his wrongdoings. And Viktor's illness would serve as like a catalyst for, you know, how they went about Hex Tech from that moment on. But it wasn't about that. It was about him. It was about his life. You know what I mean? I love that they showed him in the Undercity as a child being disabled too. People get confused when I explain that I don't actually like what happened to Viktor, but I do love his character and I do forgive them for doing what they did. I know that League lore exists already, so they had to go in that direction. He was the victim at first, or at least I was scared he was going to be. The victim character either dies or they're saved, right? That didn't happen to Viktor either way, which I was very appreciative of. They do a lot of the Arcane writers interesting things with subverting typical disabled tropes. They still
Yep.
follow them, which causes me to like. I will always call it out. I will always hesitate to say that I love everything about this because it is problematic, exhausting. You see people in my comment section on the videos where I'm just dressing up and I'm using my cane, telling me that I look like some sort of villain from a Disney show or a villain from
Oh
like a
God.
movie, or I look like an evil vampire, or I look like an evil wizard. And I'm like, why do you think that though? Why do you think that you associate me immediately, my cane, and then like just the way that I look with the villain? It's because either we're victims or we're villains.
Yeah.
And in real life, it's a little bit different than that. But for Viktor, I think a lot of people were trying to categorize him in either direction, when in reality, he is just a man who had a dream and he loses it. And I think that it's very interesting because parallel to Jayce, he's being corrupted and also taken away from his dream by the glitz and glamour of Piltover, by being the man of progress, by being the golden boy. See him on stage, you know, talking to all of these people. He becomes a counselor at one point. He moves away from the scientist archetype that he began as. And Viktor does the same thing, except it's his illness that's been dragging him away from it. And this is actually really interesting. And I do appreciate we see him in the show as time goes on become weaker, skinnier, paler, but also angrier, frustrated. We see him in the lab spending hours alone, lying to Jayce about how well he is. And I think it comes to a point where he turns to drugs, which is Shimmer, and also self-injurious behavior, which is the runes that he's covering in. Now, is it for a greater good? He's trying to like save himself. He's trying to improve his body. Yes, but those things still exist, again, without like the overarching story. And that is important to me because the more disabled you become, the more isolated you are, the more angry you are. It's exhausting to exist as a disabled person, especially around able-bodied people who have no idea that you are going through what you are going through. He's still trying to complete a task, but he's moving further and further away from it into addiction. Of course, we're not sure that he's addicted to Shimmer, but it does corrupt him. The Hex Board does tempt him away from the things that he was trying to accomplish at the beginning. I don't love the second season when it comes to Viktor. I think the first season, I could talk about him for hours. I could talk about how he wasn't his illness in the very beginning. Slowly and slowly, it became more and more of who he was, because that's what happens. The sicker you become, the more you just become your illness. Now, was I a person when I was laying in bed, you know, for 6 months at a time and I absolutely talked to nobody else? Of course. But it feels like oftentimes people don't view you as a human being. They just see your sickness. And I think Viktor was operating within that context of like, I'm nothing like I used to be. I am only my sickness now, and I will do anything. He says, I understand now. He abandons his morals that he stuck to very, very hard previously. And then that's when he starts using and he starts self harming. Again, those things, I don't think he's like has a ton of issues with that, but I do appreciate that those things are shown. And it's also shown people in the Undercity who are disabled because so many people are. For example, Sevika, and this is just like a random tangent, but she's also shown to use shimmer like
Yep.
regularly. A lot of people are, and I would say that that is yes for like it's a way of storytelling things in the background, but I also think it's implied that people who are disabled and ill use shimmer in order to stay alive and be okay. For Viktor, it's this huge decision and it's this like tipping point in Piltover's like history. Sevika is like a daily random thing that she does in order to survive. I also think that's very interesting because when you're surrounded by people who have no idea what it takes to survive a terminal or severe chronic illness like that. That kind of guilt, that fear, that moving alone, as you can see, he becomes more and more isolated as time goes on, is very interesting versus like the people in the Undercity who use openly, who will take apart their body, put it back together again, like Viktor does, in order just to stay alive. It's very much demonized in Piltover.
Mm-hmm.
Unlike in the Undercity, going back to season 2, I knew what they were going to do with him. I knew he was going to become the Machine Herald. I knew he was going to turn to eugenics and genocide as a way to achieve his glorious evolution. I was bracing for, and this is what it felt narratively like they were going to do. The first act out of me. I really liked what they did with it. The second act confused the absolute shit out of me. I don't know if I'm allowed to say that on here.
No, please
Um,
do.
okay. And then
We
the
swear
third
all the
act
time.
definitely brought me back. But for the first 2 acts, it felt like he was building and building and building and building and building. Where the Hex Core was corrupting Viktor, the Arcane was corrupting him and turning him more. I don't think he meant to hurt those people. I don't think in the very beginning he understood what he was doing. And I think the more involved in the Arcane he becomes, the less Viktor he is.
Right.
And I think the show kind of shows us that like directly by you can watch back and see that these incredibly violent intense scenes will be happening in the real physical world, and then it'll cut to Viktor and his little magic galaxy like sort of era, and it doesn't seem like he is aware of the violence and destruction that he has wrought because a physical
Yeah.
body is a way of like interacting with the world, its consciousness. Anyways, it seemed like where they were going after the second half is that Jayce, the able-bodied character, would end up, realizing that what they had done was wrong and that Viktor has gone too far and that they would have this big blowout fight. And then he'd end up killing Viktor, and Viktor's like held in his arms at the very end. He's like, I was wrong. I should have just stayed in the lab with you, Jayce. You know what I mean? You were right all along, even though I'm disabled and I have a better understanding of these things, and you were the one that did all this dumb shit in the first place. It was all me. And then Jayce would be like the leader of Piltover after, and Viktor would be like a memory because that's always how it goes with the villain characters. They
Right.
always die at the end, especially the disabled ones, and they always realize that what they were doing was totally wrong. But they didn't go that way. Instead, and I've said this out loud, like I will keep saying it. They made Jayce disabled, and a lot of people just write that off. They're like, oh, he has a leg brace now. Okay. No, he's disabled. Like in
Yeah.
fact, the scene in which Viktor's cutting the runes onto his leg and injecting shimmer very much parallels the scenes where Jayce is in the ravine and he's doing all of this. He's very desperate to live. You can see that his leg is infected, it's broken, it's not working. He's doing like it's that same desperation is shown, and I think it gives Jayce a deeper understanding of what Viktor is going through. They don't have. They do have a big blowout fight, but it was not nearly what I thought it was going to be. Like the fight between Vi, Jinx, and Warwick was way bigger. The fight between Ambessa, Kate, and Mel
Mm-hmm.
was way bigger. It was only like a few minutes long, and then at the very end, it seemed like Viktor, like Jason was just going to lay down his hammer and let it happen, which I also found very interesting that they kept their connection until the very end. The sympathy was there, even though Viktor was completely in the wrong at that point. When they brought him back in his physical form, now again, within the like backrooms-esque galaxy, wherever they
Yeah.
were, it was so important to me that Viktor stayed Viktor. And at the very end, even though he was the Machine Herald, he went back to being Viktor. And Jayce, the man who previously disregarded him, ends up coming back to him, forgiving his transgressions, and then they go out together while understanding like what they did was wrong. Was it perfect? No. did they completely subvert my expectations and in doing so make it okay? I don't think that this narrative was ableist. And I will say that every single time the cure narrative and the disabled guy who's been wronged by the other main characters becomes the villain, it is
Yeah.
always ableist. It's always ableist. Even if it's not intended to be, it is. And I will say, I think because of the way that they did it, it wasn't as bad as it could have been. I don't love it though, but I do understand that there was League lore there and that's what they were always going for. I think that they tried their best to give Victor's character justice instead of just following those exact tropes. If you're gonna do it, if you're gonna make a disabled character get worse and then become a monster and then turn to eugenics and genocide, this is the way you go.
Yeah.
Then really quickly, outside of the vacuum of Arcane, people mischaracterize Victor
Oh my
so
god.
heavily it does make me want to tear my hair out. I've talked a lot about the infantilization of his character. The problem is I'm about to make another video because people have taken that to heart, which I'm very happy about. A disabled person with a platform and people are actually listening to me. Yay! Sorry, I'm just remembering. These people have never interacted with a disabled character or disabled people their entire life. So they're doing it for the first time. So I have to be very patient.
Mhm.
I talked about the infantilization of Victor, and people overcorrected so hard that they're now in other people's comment sections. Like, basically, anytime anybody makes a skit with Victor or anybody talks about Jayce and Victor as a ship or anything, it's always, oh well, Victor's the one bossing Jayce around. Oh, well, Victor wouldn't actually do that. Jayce would never do anything for Victor because Victor's super independent. Victor only sleeps 2 hours a night and eats nothing because he's super like strong and only does what he wants to do and blah blah blah. I'm like, no, he's actually still disabled. And also, like, Jayce is also a grown man, and you don't have to hyper masculinize the disabled character in order for them to be like I said, don't infantilize this character. And y'all went, okay, cool. So he's the dominant top one, and Jayce is the one who's like pathetic and sad. And it's like, okay.
I mean, I will say
Yeah.
Jayce is pathetic, and
Oh,
he is
absolutely.
right. Like,
But it's
but I
it's just another way of dehumanizing the disabled character, though.
right,
To me,
exactly.
Right.
it's you either go in one
You're
direction or the
still
other.
you're still
It,
relying on a trope.
on an archetype
Yeah.
of a character
Yeah.
when that's like it's very difficult to me that people understand Jayce so much better than Victor simply because they do not know how to characterize Victor
Yeah.
based on his injuries. I have a lot of people asking me, "Oh, I'm writing a fic. Can I ask you a bunch of questions about this disabled character?" And it's like, "No. No, you
No.
can't.
Yeah.
What if you just pretended in your head that you were disabled for a minute with me? Like this thing called empathy. It's really cool. If you look at other disabled people's posts and you listen to them, you might be able to develop it a little bit easier.
Or just like do
It's
your
just
research. There
Yeah.
are so many
It's
narratives
so
out
easy.
there in the world about what it's like to be disabled. The fact that like most able-bodied people don't know them is absolutely a result of social
it's
conditioning.
Yeah.
Go
yeah.
find the research. It's
Like
not that hard.
Mhm.
for me, for example, I don't think that Jayce would ever pick Victor up without his permission. That's something you see very often in fixes, Jayce like doing things for Victor or manhandling him in a way that is like almost parental and ridiculous. But I do think that Victor makes Jayce go get the stuff from downstairs. He's like, "You got to go get that for me. I can't do it on my own. Will you carry this extremely heavy thing up the stairs for me? I'm not doing that." I think he tells him what he needs because he's a disabled adult. He
Right.
understands his own accommodations. He understands what he needs. But instead of doing that, they're like either he's completely reliant on Jayce and completely helpless, or he's completely hyper independent, does everything on his own, won't let anybody help him. And it's like, no, no.
Yeah.
I don't let
I
anybody touch my cane or play with my cane because I think that's inappropriate. That's my leg when I'm using it, except for when I need somebody to hold it and I'll just shove it against their chest and be like, hold this while I'm doing something. You know what I mean? It's very much just dependent on the person and the situation. And people act like it's so confusing when it's like, no, actually, it's just we're just people.
Yeah.
We're
mhm.
all people. And
Well, and
it's
it
just
betrays such a nasty lack of empathy too, because you see fic writers out there in the world willing to research any kind of life experience. But disabled life experience creates such a bizarre internal ick. And
yeah.
that's so nasty. That is so nasty. And
The
fucking gross.
fear of offending too is also a type of ableism that I have not been able to like. Again, I have to hold these people's hands and walk them through the most basic of crypt theory. It is very
Yep.
difficult to like explain something that's a little bit more advanced. I'm still telling people, wait, no, no, disabled people, they're like people, like they're actually just, yeah, they're human beings, and these people are like,
Yep.
Wait,
what?
what? Oh my god.
So when we
Yeah.
get more complex, it's more difficult. But I think people see Victor's illness as a way to project, which I've seen a lot of. I've a lot of people have asked me because I'm also transgender about trans Victor and how there's so many headcans of him out there as transgender. Also about him being ace and him like what do I think about him being ace? And I think that while all of these things are very interesting, I also think that they take his disability and use it as a metaphor for other things
Yep.
when it's just
Right.
about
It's
disability.
just
His
what it
narrative,
is.
Yeah.
his story is about physical disability, physical transformation, trying to get his body into a place that works for him. And is that very relatable to transgender people and ace people and people across the world because we're all human and we all share experiences? Yes. But so many people take that, especially fig writers, and you can see they have no idea what a disability is or how it works or anything, but they find certain parts of that allegory for them interesting. And that's what they'll use instead of real lived experiences of disabled people. I want to talk about really briefly Victor, disability and fetishization slash sexualization of disability. Is that okay if I talk about that on here
Yes,
really quick?
100%.
Because I've noticed,
Although
Absolutely.
I have one point. It
yes.
can't be brief.
Yeah. Take as much time as you want with that
Okay.
because it's important.
Yeah, I think people have a lot of trouble with characterizing Victor in general, but I think especially when it comes to his sexuality, so many people disregarding what that one writer said because I don't listen to people
Yeah.
after they put out the show and they're like, "Wait, you can't see characters." I don't care. Should have written it into the show then. When you have like
Period.
7 years to
Period.
do that.
Yeah,
Yeah,
no,
I'm not
get
listening to you
fucked.
now. I'm watching the show that you apparently
That you
wrote.
made.
Yeah,
Anyways,
literally. Yeah.
so many people headcanon Victor as Ace. I don't think because of the way that he is,
Yeah.
but because they cannot conceptualize him having desire, having attraction. I've seen people say, "Oh, well, he's just very emotionless in the first season, and that's why I headcanon him as Ace. He doesn't show desire or want or any of that." And I'm like, "Were you
Sheesh.
watching the same show as I was?" Because it
Literally.
seems like you look at him and you just see like a cardboard cutout rather than a person. He's animated very like expressive. He makes jokes. He's funny. He's witty. He's sharp. He can be mean and kind of bitchy. He's a very complex character,
Yes.
and people are like, "Well, I didn't see him doing anything or saying anything or expressing any emotion," and I'm like, "Okay,
We
you
did
have
not watch the
no
same
idea what
show.
you're talking about." Um, but then on the flip side, instead of completely desexualizing him, oh, you'll see the fetishists. People in my comments being so deeply weird, especially, it's not even just about attraction to the disabled character, but it's how it bleeds into real life. Somebody under my video, I lost this comment because otherwise I would have made a video about it, said verbatim, "Is it weird that I'm now attracted to disabled leg guys after watching Arcane?" Yes, it is weird.
Bye.
You should have been attracted to disabled
Bye.
leg guys all along.
Period.
But like, it's just it. It's like
What an odd thing to say on
what an
Beyonce's
odd
internet.
thing to
What?
say. You'll have people seeing the disability, the leg, they'll like sexualize it in a very weird way, especially in terms of making him submissive or seem weak or any of those stereotypes. And then you have the people on the other side, they'll see any sort of sexualization of Victor and they'll freak out and they'll be like, "You're fetishizing him." And then this is annoying because they'll do it under completely normal fan art. Like, have you been on Twitter in your life? They're going to do crazy things to those characters. None of us have any choice.
No.
You just scroll at this point. Those artists
Rule
are
39,
We just have to
friends.
sit and take it.
34.
Yeah, 34. Get it together.
34. I
Yeah.
don't know why I thought
Come on
39.
now.
34.
Jesus
Oh my
Christ.
god.
And they'll like be like, "Oh, he would never do that," or "You can't do that. You're fetishizing a disabled character. You can't find his leg brace attractive. You're a freak for thinking the cane makes him look good." And it's like, okay. So actually, as a disabled person, you know, those things are a part of my body. Whether I'm wearing them or they're off of me, they are my legs. When I'm using them, they are a part of me. I don't think it's weird that people think, "Oh, the brace looks good," because guess what? I'm wearing it. Certain clothes make you look attractive. And I get that people would be like attracted to it. The problem is that people are so weirded out by their attraction to disabled people, they just can't act normal about it. And then you have people on the other side who feel so bad about their attraction to disabled people that they're policing other people, accusing them as being fetishists. It's impossible because I argue with one side about infantilization, and then the other side rears its ugly head and freaks out, and they're like, "How dare you sexualize my poor little baby Victor, who's totally asexual and has never done anything in his life wrong ever?" That man
Yeah.
did war
That
crimes
man is
and heroin in his lab. He's not like he killed his assistant on accident, but he did it.
Yeah.
Like he hits
Yeah.
Jayce like twice in the show. Just like
Yeah.
smacks his
Yeah.
hand away.
Yeah.
He's not an emotionalist character. He's also not desirous. In my opinion, he's shown to want Jayce or at least have emotions towards him. It's very obvious, especially with his parallels with Mel. I don't want to get into shipping, at least right now. I'm just talking about his character in general and the way that people receive him. It's
Yeah.
very frustrating. Feminization of disabled characters, the infantilization, and then certain fetishistic things are disgusting and wrong, and stop doing that. But I can't talk about that without it being received as don't ever sexualize disabled people. Disabled people are not capable of that, which is both of them are ableism, but both of those are concepts that are a little too difficult for people who are just realizing that disabled people have emotions. So
And can
it's
be hot.
And
yeah,
agency.
Right.
These to me, like, these feel, and this is, ooh, sorry, tapped my microphone thingy. For me, like as an autistic person, I feel like a lot of the conversation about disability boils down to agency. And
Mhm.
both sides of this coin feel like they come from places of like not seeing Victor as an agent in his own life.
Exactly.
And
Like he's
like
just not
that's
capable of making his own decisions. This happens
right.
a lot to people who are specifically autistic, neurodivergent, but
Yep.
especially intellectually disabled people.
Yep.
People say, "Oh, we should like this. This is full on eugenics. We should sterilize people. We should not let them have kids. We should not let them date, each other or outside of their disability." Like it's so deeply
Yeah.
wrong. The opinions that able-bodied people have on other people's bodies when you are not them, you're an ableist. I've talked about this when it comes to people headcanon Victor as ace. And do I think that is a completely ableist headcanon? You can't do that whatsoever. No, obviously people are going to have their headcanons. I cannot decide for you. But I will say I do believe that comes from a place of not seeing disabled people as capable of desire. And that comes from a very real historical standpoint of not
Yes.
allowing disabled people to have sex, period. Like
That's right.
period. We were
Yeah.
not even allowed outside because of ugly laws until like the 70s. It was
Yep.
ridiculous, and people don't even know the historical context there. And they're claiming that he's just, oh, he's arrow ace. He doesn't want. How do you know that?
Right.
How do you know that? Or do you just
Yeah.
assume real life disabled people are arrow ace because we're just not capable of desire or are making our own adult decisions, even though we are adults? It's like there's this commercial that went pretty viral. It was of a woman with Down syndrome, and she's doing things that subvert people's expectations. And I think she said the word fuck during it.
Yep.
You know what I mean? And she
Mhm.
said something
I've
about having
seen this.
sex. And able-bodied people lost their minds.
They
They're like,
freak
"Oh
the fuck
my
out.
god, you go girl!" And it's like, I know disabled people that are getting more tail than any able-bodied
I
person ever.
literally
I don't know why this is so shocking to you. Disabled people are freaks.
Yeah.
Love y'all. But like genuinely, I don't the disconnect there to like, yes, girl, get your like
pussy slay
glass
queen. Yeah,
off.
like
Yeah.
boost.
Why
Yeah.
Well,
please?
and then there's like this whack stratification of what kind of disabled people are allowed to express desire, and that she's allowed to because she's got Down syndrome, but she's conventionally
She
attractive. And like, we love the autistic gamer boy because he can speak. And he doesn't, and he doesn't use a mobility aid, and that's so
Yeah.
fucked up. And sometimes I
the
see disabled people buying into that narrative, and it pisses me
oh,
the fuck off.
sorry, I
Drives
want
me
to
fucking crazy. Yeah.
there's definitely levels to this, and I will say, as somebody who I'm sorry to toot my own horn, is conventionally attractive. I'm tall. I think I'm well spoken, and I have interesting things. People follow me because of that. But
Yes.
disabled people who say the same things as me who do the same things as me, who create the same kind of content I do, who are either more disabled than me. And by the way, when I say more disabled, I never mean more valid, but I do in fact mean less able-bodied. And this is something that I've also had to explain to people over and over and over again, that there
Yeah.
is a more severe side of disability that most people ignore. I used to live there. I used to be there. That was before I had any following or anything. People didn't listen to what I had to say because I was never put together. I was never well spoken. I was always in pain and I was in my wheelchair. People weren't interested in that. In fact, I had mutuals that are funnier and cooler than I am that are in powered chairs. They will never grow to the following that I have because people do not care about what they have to say. And it's bullshit. I will always
Yep.
be here for the more disabled people than me. But it's also like, I also am very aware of the way that I have to present myself to people, because people do infantilize me, which you think you're like a 6'1" grown man and you sound that you do. People infantilize you. This has happened to me multiple times where I'll be out with friends drinking. I'll be like 2 beers in, and they'll be like, "Let's stop for the night. Like let's get you sobered up." I'm like, my best friend is doing like 4 shots. It's been like an hour since he did 4 shots. What are you talking about? Why are you cutting me off when I haven't drank anything? It's this assumption that disabled people
Yeah.
are not able to make their own decisions or move on their own. They just infantilize him to a point where it's
Yeah.
ridiculous. And then I say something about it and they're like, never mind. He's actually,
Yeah. Uh,
I don't know, some other
nuance
completely different character.
nuance on the
Who's that?
internet. Yeah, right.
What's that?
Oh,
I don't know what you're talking about.
Yeah.
No,
To be honest, I've never heard that word before.
it's exhausting. It's exhausting on the internet, and I think in fandom spaces in particular, because people are so passionate and have such strong feelings about pieces of media that we can relate to real life, but I think sometimes people don't make the connection. Like they don't get that it has like real life implications because they existed like that's my favorite Blorbo, like whatever, like, and they don't understand that like maybe this is actually serving a greater narrative. Maybe
Yeah.
we should have a larger conversation about this.
I see it a lot with Caitlyn,
Oh my god,
especially.
yeah.
Yes.
I try to stay away from that subject because the Caitlyn Kiramann fans they ride hard for their
Mm-hmm.
girl. And
Yeah.
you know what? I respect that. But I also think it is reductive to her character to not look at the bad things that she's done because she has
Right.
Yes.
done really bad things. And she also grew up in a place of privilege that was inaccessible to literally every
Extreme.
single other character that was like a main character, even Jayce,
Yeah.
who grew up in their home, like as being sponsored by them, was not at the level of privilege that Caitlyn was. And I wrote something down really specifically because showing Vi, Jinx, Echo, Clagger, Milo as children, like literal little kids, committing crimes in order to feed themselves, in order to make it in the Undercity, they are deemed as bad and immoral.
Mhm.
Versus Caitlyn grew up in a place of privilege, training to become a cop from a very, very young age, being groomed into that system of oppression. She's never looked at as immoral until she starts doing these crazy things. And even then, she's forgiven way faster than any of the other characters within the show, even by the fandom.
Yeah.
Like she doesn't
Yes.
have to do anything in terms of redemption in order for her to get better. I think that there are a lot of different ways that the show could have gone in terms of Caitlyn and Vi. I think that they shot Vi's character down a little bit in the second season, a
Mhm.
bit.
I agree.
Yeah.
My biggest disappointment in general was that Vi put on the badge and the uniform, but Caitlyn at the end of the day never took it off. And I think it would have been so much more meaningful to the overall narrative and their relationship and her character growth to show at least a 30-second montage of her taking off the badge and putting it in a drawer somewhere to show that, like, yes,
Yeah.
Vi has come from the Undercity, but they're meeting in the middle. I didn't
Right.
feel like that happened at all. I
No.
think it
At
really
all.
Nope.
it really showed that Vi was coming to Caitlyn's side, the good side, and it really disappointed a lot of people. But then when you try to talk about that, people get really defensive and upset.
Right.
You know what I mean? Even
Yeah.
Jayce and Viktor at the very end of it all came together in a way where they were on even footing. You know what I mean? Sacrificing themselves in order for the greater good. That just didn't happen. When we end with Vi and Kate, it seems like they're completely on uneven footing, especially after the loss of Jinx again, the loss of Vander again, the loss of everything she's ever known and had, versus Caitlyn, who wins this war and seemingly walks away with everything but a mother, which
Mhm.
is
And an
terrible.
eyeball.
And an eyeball. Yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
Yeah, I yeah.
Oh no, she can't shoot any more Zonites.
Oh
Yeah.
wow.
I'm gonna say this so gently and so tenderly, but if you can be critical of the IDF, but you cannot be critical of Caitlin Kiramann, you have some work to do.
Mhm.
It's
You have some
the
work to do.
Mhm.
the problem is that they don't conceptualize the real life bad guys as
Right.
people. The
Yes.
IDF
Right.
soldiers, the individual IDF soldiers, they're people with
Yes.
probably decent senses of humor, with favorite
Mhm.
foods, with
Mhm.
children, with dogs, with
Yep.
histories, with memories. They're
Yep.
human.
Mhm.
They're
Mhm.
also monsters. And
Yes.
that's something that, like, because we're able to view it from like a very like zoomed back lens, when we find someone like Caitlin, who we know all of this stuff about, and we've sympathized with her character up until this point, especially through this romance of her falling in love with Vi, it is difficult to then go, hey, this is crazy and doing a lot of crazy fascist stuff, because you feel for her. And the story is written in a way that you are supposed to sympathize and understand sort of where she's coming from and with her actions. But at the same
Yep.
time, those people that are unable to be critical of her, they scare me the most, because when you meet a Nazi face to face, and sometimes you'll be yelling and screaming and throwing punches, but a lot of the times it's a handshake
Yeah.
and
Mhm.
firm words, and like people who have not done actual activism or talked to fascists or interacted with them in real life, bigots, even just like general people. It's very difficult to like conceptualize. Yeah, these are people. These are
Yep.
people. These are your friends. This is your
Mhm.
sister,
That's
your
right.
brother, your mom, your dad. These people are real, but they're
Yeah.
also bad.
Yeah. There was a
Yeah.
video that you came out with that I absolutely loved, and I might get the exact quote wrong, but essentially what you were saying, and this was like right when like Caitlyn gassing the Undercity. This was like the
Right.
most recent episode that came out where like it's
Yeah.
like literal like gas chambers essentially for the
Yes.
Undercity. And you were talking about how Arcane as like a study of media is really interesting because it shows how far people are willing to go to like defend a character. Like it
Yes.
pushes it because everybody is kind of up to their own shit. Like everybody has
Mhm.
like significant flaws in their characters, and you can
Right.
like love a character, but also you need to be able to like critique them and acknowledge that like wow, this was like a really fucked up thing that this character did.
I think it's kind of like the frog in the boiling water type of thing, where
Yeah.
you don't realize it's boiling until you're all it's too late. And the thing is with Caitlyn, I think they did this very interesting. I don't know if it was intentional, because the way that they wrote it at the very end, they both sidesed it a bit too hard for me to believe that every single thing in the writing was intentional and woke.
Right.
But with Caitlyn, I think you're supposed to fall in love with her in the first season. I think you're
Yeah.
supposed to forgive the
Yeah.
fact that she's an enforcer, and you're supposed to relate and empathize and love her character. And the second season, I think it's supposed to test that. You know what I mean? Little by little, she gets worse and worse and worse and worse, to the point where she is, in fact, gassing people. There's a scene where she's talking to one of the guys who worked for Smeech, and she has her
Mhm.
gun in her hand. This man is coughing and wheezing and crying.
Yeah.
I think he's handcuffed on her trigger
Yeah.
as she's holding the gun, questioning this man, threatening to shoot him point blank in the face. And people are still defending her, when in the first season they were not defending Marcus, they were not defending Mbessa, they were not defending these people who were bad people, but because she's my Blorbo.
Yeah.
You love her and you forgive her, and it's easy to go along with these things, just like Vi was going along with these things, until you get to a point you look back and you're like, wait, there was a line there.
Mhm.
There was a line way back there, and I love this character so much that I crossed it without even realizing it. How far are you willing to go? How far is your Blorbo willing to go before you step back and say, "Hey, this is too much"? And I also
Mhm.
think that's a reflection on like morality and connection in general, because in real life we often get that perspective of, or we don't often get that perspective of like, oh, this is my best friend, you know what I mean? But a lot of times we go along with those things until the point of it's too late, I fucked up, I had too much sympathy for this person. I think you're supposed to step back from the point where she becomes a dictator and she's actively gassing people, and look at your own morals and be like, why was I willing to defend this character until that point? Why did it take them doing that much bad for me to realize that this was in fact bad? But a lot of people didn't see it that way. They saw her lose her mother and they were like, "Oh, it's a reasonable crash out."
Oh
I don't know.
no.
I don't think gassing people is a reasonable crash out. And I still have
No.
people under one of my videos where I'm criticizing the use of gas, defending her use of the gas. They're going through insane hoops. It's okay to say a character that you like did something wrong. Believe it
Yeah.
or not, Viktor is my favorite character. I will defend him until the day that I die. Did he kill a bunch of people? Yeah, that was pretty messed up of him, in fact. I think that he's not a bad person, but I think he was caught up with a lot of different stuff. These people are unable to look at these actions critically. That it scares me.
Yeah. No. Yeah.
Mhm.
It does.
It is
And we.
well, and like the thing about Arcane, in addition to all the other things about Arcane, that like you have to remember as you're watching it is that like you can take away all these different readings, and that's part of what
Hmm.
makes it interesting as a piece of media. At the end of the day, this is a piece of media that's produced by Riot Games. And the job of Riot Games is to sell violent video games that are
Hmm.
entrenched in the logics of imperialism and empire. And so, to a certain extent, it's like you've been saying this whole time, Finch. Like they had to bring the League lore in with
Yeah.
Viktor's story because that's what happened. Like that's the game.
Hmm.
Um, and so, I feel like part of, the job of someone who's looking at a piece of media like Arcane in a critical way is to think about not just what the story is doing, but like where is that coming from?
Hmm.
And in this case, it's coming from this very, very long history of League of Legends, the type of video game that League of Legends is, what kinds of logics it replicates. And like at the end of the day, they still want Kiramann to be a champion that people will choose and
Right.
play as in
Mhm.
the game.
There were so many mixed responses to season 2 because it did feel out of character for a lot of the characters to
Yep.
go the routes that they did, but it makes sense to me because the league lore is already established. It
Yeah.
to me feels like the first season was Arcane. That was like the story that they were originally telling. The second season is how they tie all of that into the game. But I
Yep.
think that it was honestly written in a way, to me, it seems, where you can kind of, if you're not a league person, just cut it straight down the middle and ignore everything that happened in the second
Yeah.
season and
Yes.
write your own ending. Which I have this thing called Finch canon, which whatever I don't like from a show after it's over, what are you talking
Yeah.
about?
That didn't
The
happen.
characters that I liked got
Yeah.
together.
Um.
Everyone's alive. They wrapped it up in a very meaningful, understanding way. The writers aren't crazy people. Obviously, they wouldn't end it like that. It's
Yeah.
Finch canon. I completely disregard what actually happened. It's my favorite thing. I still have not
Period.
finished Voltron or Supernatural. It's been like 10 years.
Screaming and don't even
Refuse.
bother. Oh my god.
No.
Well, and like
Yeah.
this is what I love about Arcane. I've been very critical of Arcane this whole time. I've been talking a lot of shit, but like this is what I love about it is that it does things in an interesting and nuanced enough way that there is a huge contingent of the fandom who have nothing to do with the video game League of Legends and don't
Yeah.
care and don't want anything to do with League of Legends. And that makes it really interesting as a media
Yeah.
object. And like when you spend your time sort of immersed in the world of the show, and it has affordances for both kinds of audiences, and like
Yeah.
that's a really sick thing about it. Like that rocks.
I think if it wasn't like if they did not have to go in the directions that League of Legends had already carved out for the show, I think it would have been a better ending. I think that they
Yeah.
would have done it in a very different way. And I think the characters would have been different. But I forgive them because it was pre-established, and also again with the writing, with just the tropes in terms of disability and inequality. That's the biggest issue I have with Okay, and I love it
Period.
enough to criticize it. I think they completely dropped the ball when it came to the major overarching theme of oppression, inequality, and like specifically structural oppression, with Piltover being the top side and Undercity being quite literally under them. Like you touched on in the beginning of the show, it just really felt like they cut that part out at the very end. And to me, it does feel like they ended up telling two slightly different stories for two slightly different audiences. And listen, I forgive League of Legends players because it gave us the show Arcane, but I will never be one of you.
Never.
I
Never in a
can't do it.
million years.
I like
Literally
the
never.
I like the animations of like Jayce swinging around the hammer. I think that's funny, but other than that, that's the extent of my interaction with them.
Yeah. Yeah. Just to kind of round this out. I think and Earth and I have talked about this as well at length on this podcast, that you can enjoy a piece of media, you can enjoy a character that is deeply flawed and still be
Hmm.
critical of it. You can enjoy a product, a TV show, a movie, you can have critiques with it and still enjoy it. I think if you are ever going to engage with media critically or analyze media, the critique just comes with the territory. There is no perfect
Yeah.
piece of media. There's always going to be something wrong, and you can equally like praise and critique something, and there can be things that you find deeply problematic about certain aspects of writing, certain aspects of character, and still be like, yeah, I enjoy this character. I also acknowledge these things wrong with it. Those can exist. Again, nuance is
Yeah.
dead on the internet,
I
but
I
you
think
know,
that like for me, Arcane is quite literally, and again, me personally, my personal taste, I think it's my favorite show, just point
yeah,
blank ever. And I
it's
don't have a lot of favorites, things that I would rank top. Animation wise, writing wise, character wise, I love this show. But because I love it so entirely, I want to take it in
mm,
entirely. And that includes the parts that kind of suck. And I think that people who do not view the show as a whole, maybe love certain parts of it, but don't quite love Arcane like this show. I think if you love a piece of media, you have to engage with it critically. Otherwise, you're not
Yeah.
actually engaging with that piece of media. You're engaging with an idea of it.
right.
Um, that's why I will always be critical of Arcane because I fucking love it. It's my favorite.
Yeah.
Period. I want to talk a little bit more about power and privilege in Arcane, but specifically through the lens of each, not every single character, because I only have notes for a few of them, but like there were a couple ones that I really wanted to talk about. So again, we've seen these like subtle, not so subtle nods to like trends we see in certain demographics, in the U.S., but also like in activism, just like in general. Uh, and I know that we talked a little bit about how like race and gender don't play nearly as much of a role, but I do think there are like subtle hints at it in Arcane, specifically with Vi and Echo, sort of both coming from the Undercity, and Vi, who is a white woman who aligns with enforcers and oppressors to kind of create change, whereas Echo is the one who's a black man cultivating community, directly providing resources to disenfranchised groups, actually creating change, recreation, weapons, shelter, safety. And Earth, I believe you had a note here about Jinx as well.
Oh yeah, I did have a note about Jinx as an as like a third model of activist.
Yeah.
I mean, she's basically a domestic terrorist, you know. And that's sort of like how she performs her own activism, and some of it is like accidental and emotionally motivated, but she ends up becoming like a symbol of resistance. Jinx I think is interesting for a whole lot of reasons, partially because she's so mentally unwell that I would classify her as neurodivergent. Um,
Oh yeah.
and that the result of her actions sort of, you know, glorify her as an idea, but in a way that's like in no way connected to her actual embodied experience. There's like the really funny moment in season 2 where she shows up and she's like, I'm Jinx, and everyone's like, the fuck you are.
You? Yeah.
Right.
The fuck
Yeah.
you, who are you teeny tiny little person? But I think it's really interesting how like if you eliminated race from the equation, you would still get these kind of different models of activism that either
Right.
align themselves or don't align themselves with the logics of empire. Community care is very anti-empire,
Mm-hmm.
um, and aligning yourself with the enforcers is very pro-empire. And it is interesting allegorically that like Vi aligns herself uh with Empire and then Echo doesn't, but like Jinx is kind of this interesting third option because she's, you know, white, thin, able-bodied, pretty privileged, and she's the domestic terrorist. Like that's not
Right.
who you picture when you picture what a domestic terrorist looks like.
Hmm.
And I just think that's real interesting. You have different models.
Yeah. Love
I
it.
also think the again, what I was talked about how like we often sometimes like we dehumanize the bad guys, and that's why it's easier to call them the bad guys and
Mm.
not sympathize with them. With Jinx, but like you said, domestic terrorist, that doesn't really fit her model. The thing is like she is a direct result. Her mental state is a direct result. And we were actually shown how her mental state is a direct result of the trauma that she experienced when she was younger. Jinx is more of like it's really interesting to me how they subvert these expectations of like again she's the villain, but at the end of the day she is a victim first and
Right.
foremost, before she was the villain, which she is very much somebody who is a dangerous and I wouldn't I don't like to classify her as completely bad, because it's shown that her intentions are mixed all over the place, and they really have no.
Clear
She has
alignment.
no like end goal. She just feels and acts.
Mhm.
Unlike Echo, who is very calculated in his plans and does all of this very important work, which I think the most interesting part of that is that like Jinx is recognized, her face is plastered everywhere. Vi is even recognized in Piltover, but Echo gets no recognition at all whatsoever.
Yep.
I mean, other than Heimerdinger, but that's even just completely separate from like the main plot. When he was,
Yeah.
it's very frustrating.
I
See
would
how
argue, I have a lot of feelings about Heimerdinger. I would argue that like Heimerdinger is the most like disenfranchised because of his embodiment as like a different species. Fucking no one takes him seriously because he's a furry little guy.
Yeah, he's a little handsome
And if
man.
he was a big humanoid man, I feel like
Yeah.
that might be a little bit different. And so it's like unsurprising to me that he chooses to eventually align himself with Echo and the Firelights because he is different. Like in the society of Arcane,
Yeah.
he carries visible markers. He is a different species.
Yes.
And he gets treated real differently because of that. And I think that's fascinating.
Yeah. Love it. And then I also had notes from Jayce of like, I very much think he parallels this like immigrant story. I think he visibly just looks like a Latino man, and him literally almost getting banished or like deported for his mistakes, making it into high society and power. He has this disdain and like distrust for people in the Undercity, despite his partner being from the Undercity. But like Viktor's like, like one of the good ones or whatever. He's different. But he calls the people from the Undercity, blanket term, just calling them dangerous. They're like, oh, they're not allowed because they're dangerous. And like, I think we saw this a lot, not to bring back the election, but we've seen this in the election of like Latino men and their proximity to whiteness compared to other people of color, and that affecting how they align with empire and capitalism and like all those things.
Yeah.
Positions of power, structures of power.
Yeah. I think I do want to problematize. I think a lot of what you're saying is correct, but also I do want to problematize like that it's proximity to whiteness. It's not so much that, but proximity to power and proximity to power structures. The thing that we do know about Jayce, who I think is also voiced by a Latino voice actor, is that his family makes hammers. So he comes from an industrial family that has sort of deep entrenchment in, he comes from a background with a vested interest in the success of empire. I don't know if to me nothing about Jayce reads as immigrant. I think that there are some similarities to I think there are some similarities to what we saw in the most recent election with, people who have come to this country and are aligning themselves with power because they think that it will keep them safe. I don't think it's a one-to-one,
Yeah.
And maybe I haven't read the text as closely.
No,
but,
I mean I literally, because he was in that like really frosty, again, I don't know the League of Legends lore of him being in that like frosty snow area and then being like teleported to Piltover. I just figured he was like pulled out of a certain place and put into Piltover.
Yeah. I mean, in my opinion, I feel like the text doesn't give us enough background to make that assertion. And the reason, and I'm dogged about this in part because like the professor that I work with researches immigration. And so I've sort of spent my whole semester looking at immigrants and migrant stories. And like, I think it's an interesting concept. And I also think it's a little bit of an overread, particularly because I know that those of us we're not immigrants, the three of us on this call. I think it's I think it's just a little bit of an overread, and you can totally feel free to cut this. By the way,
Hi folks, this is Earth from the future. I wanted to record this for you all because I don't think I articulated myself very well in this moment, and I feel like I was actually kind of rude. I basically just said, you're wrong and I know more than you without explaining myself, and that's not cool, and it doesn't lead to good discussion. So I want to apologize to you all and to my co-hosts, Skullie and Finch. the context of what happened on my end is that I had a little bit of an emotional reaction, and my words kind of failed me in this moment. Earlier in the week, before recording this episode, I sat through 2.5 hours of undergrad presentations about immigration, some of which were very personal and very emotional. And I don't really think that I had fully processed that when I sat down to record this episode, and it was kind of impacting me in this moment in a way that I didn't expect. So what I'm going to do now is say what I wish that I had said about this conversation we were having about Jayce and the headcanon of Jayce as sort of a Latino immigrant. The first thing that I really wish I had done is say in my opener to this episode, when I was starting to talk about race and ethnicity in Arcane, that race and ethnicity aren't just the color of your skin. They are interpretable as socially and culturally constructed. And they're hyper-specific to world history, both the history of our world and, in science fiction and fantasy, the histories of those worlds. So when we meet characters in sci-fi and fantasy who are people of color, it's really important to remember that. Finch very wisely says that there's the world of the show and there's the real world. They're constantly in conversation with each other, but they're also always different, right? People in our world created the world of Arcane, and that's something that we think about and talk about a lot in this episode. But also, they've created the world of Arcane in a way that gives it key differences from our world. Immigrant status is also a thing that is socially and culturally constructed. But what's true about immigrant status, sort of regardless of the world that you put it in, is that it's fundamentally about being a perpetual outsider and struggling with being perceived as an outsider in the culture that you have found yourself in. So an important caveat to this and to this conversation in general is that I have no issue whatsoever with immigrants and people of color reading their own stories onto Jayce. That's actually like a really important fanish practice. Just to give an example, later in this episode, I will say that I headcanon Jinx as autistic, even if that isn't particularly textually supported, because there are some things about her portrayal that reflect my experience as an autistic person. So I can say that because I'm speaking from a place of authority, right? I'm talking about my own experience. The reason that it matters for us to have a conversation about who gets to headcanon what is that when headcanons come from out-group members, sometimes, not always, but sometimes, they accidentally reinforce stereotypes or conversations or narratives that aren't really true. Finch brings this up a lot in the episode regarding disability and able-bodied fanfic writers headcanoning Viktor is kind of weak, right? That's a stereotype that doesn't come from their lived experience and makes it feel like they don't see disabled people as full people. And I don't want us to ever be treading in that territory on this podcast, so I feel like it's really important to have this conversation. For me, the thing that really hit home for me is that the issue with us as non-Latine podcasters, non-immigrant podcasters, headcanoning a narrative that Jayce feels like a Latino immigrant who experiences proximity to whiteness is that that narrative is a little bit reductive. It doesn't really fully consider Latinidad or the immigrant experience or American power or power in Arcane in like the context of the show. And I feel like it's just important to acknowledge that and break it down a little bit. Latinidad is a very, very specific identity that's shaped by real world culture and language and history. And in order to read Latinidad onto a story, we need to remember that. So for me, when I look at Jayce as a character, I read him based on what I don't see. First of all, I don't see Jayce exhibiting any characteristics that I would qualify as Latino.
that's not to say that he has to act like a stereotype in order to be legible that way. But like, for example, as, you know, if Jayce were an immigrant, I feel like he would get told that he's brilliant for an outsider. He might face a language barrier, communication differences, or discrimination from the elite institution that he is a student at, that he researches at, right? And we don't see him encounter any of those sorts of things that are like very real things for Latino immigrant students, researchers, and academics at elite institutions. Viktor's the one who's constantly facing microaggressions, not Jayce. So, you know, Jayce is this sort of like golden boy. He's upheld as this man of progress. He gets to speak about his research in front of large crowds. He is highly respected, and we don't see him struggle with any of that. And so, you know, that sort of makes me think maybe we are reading a little bit too much. Now, I want to address a little bit the allegory about proximity to whiteness, because I think that there is an interesting conversation going on here, but it's important to understand all the component parts. And like what we're talking about when we say proximity to whiteness. One of the things that comes up a lot in literature about immigration is that immigrants will often seek to align themselves with the dominant narratives and power structures of the places they wind up in order to guarantee their safety and success. It's a reaction to feeling like you need to assimilate in order to be valued, to be perceived as a valid, good citizen of the country. There are so many discourses about immigrants as hardworking and, you know, people who are a credit to our country, and, you know, good immigrants versus bad immigrants. And that weighs very, very heavily on people, that stigma of being perceived as a bad immigrant. So, you know, there's this tendency to align with dominant discourses and with power. And in America, our dominant discourses and power structures are very, very seeped in white supremacy. Like, they're so seeped in white supremacy. And that might not necessarily be top of mind for people who come here and attempt to align themselves with our power structures, right? They might not be thinking about it as proximity to whiteness, because proximity to whiteness doesn't really paint the full picture of their experience. Which is much more about belonging and assimilation and struggle. So, you know, as people who want to deconstruct racism and critique media thoughtfully, we have to be careful about blanket statements around systems of power and like what those statements are about. Because what we really don't want to do is accidentally reinforce a narrative that like immigrants are bad people who uphold our country's most corrupt systems, you know? So that was sort of the issue that I take with the argument about proximity to whiteness. I do think that Jayce is highly aligned with proximity to power. And that feels very, very consistent with his role as a member of Piltover's elite intellectual class. Because in the world of Arcane, right, the systems and powers are decoupled from white supremacy in a way that they are not in our world. In the show, we very clearly see logics of empire and logics of colonialism and occupation and violence, but we also see that the people at the top are all equally capable of propping up those systems, and they all benefit from those systems sort of equally. And it's really, really interesting. This is something that science fiction does really well. Which is to sort of help us examine our systems and structures of power in our world in a way that's a little bit different, right? It's a really fascinating exercise that helps us disentangle our dominant social logics from the racialized and gendered context that they arise in our world. Anyway, I feel like all of that was sort of important to say. Because we spend so much time on our podcast talking about identity and about politics, I would feel like a really silly human being to not say what I wanted to say. With so much gratitude to all of you and to Skullie and to Finch for making space for these conversations. All right, enough about this. Let's get back to the show. Yeah.
I think if he is coded in that way, which I can see it, but I do wish that it was elaborated a little bit more on where he came from. I think it's definitely a sort of statement on, even though he came over very, very young. He also had he was able to get educated, which is a huge thing in Piltover, is education and academia, and he's in the university. I think his proximity to power and wealth in terms of like the Kiramanns. We see his mother like once in the beginning and then once at the very end. And I think it's supposed to show that he might have come from something less, but he gets swept up into all of it and then shot into this position of extreme power when not only his, like, again, education and his background, but also his face. We kind of see through like Silco, Vander, Vi, and Jinx, and then also Viktor and Jayce, that physicality is a huge part of the way that people are perceived. Viktor is small and skinny and disabled. Jayce is large and handsome, and he is the face of
Strong.
their entire operation and ends up overshadowing Viktor in a very real way. And I think that even though, because they have the same education, they are very smart in the same ways, they do not do enough explaining with some of the backgrounds of these characters. And I think that it would be a lot more interesting, but also it would make more sense that actions like these characters take if we were getting just a little bit more explanation. I think it's just his storyline is about being swept away from oppression and then the disconnect that you experience after that, because it is very real how some people are completely disconnected from their own marginalized communities and the places that they came from, which I think, I don't know much about it. I mean, you're obviously smarter than me about this.
No, I think the thing you said is right. That there is something in Jayce's story that's about being sort of yoinked away from oppression and being given privileges that entrench him in society and give him a vested interest in like the progress of society. That could be a whole lot of things. That could be about class. That could be about
Exactly.
national origin. That could be about any number of things. But like it's present in that way, and I think the way you just broadly described it, like that feels accurate to me.
Love it. Awesome. I'm gonna keep that in because I think that's a good conversation to have.
Okay.
I
hate telling people they're wrong. I'm sorry, Skullie.
No, it's okay. Hey, we're here in the name of learning. We're here in the name of discussion.
Yes.
Part of discussion
You're
means
so right.
Sometimes you're wrong. Sometimes you make mistakes.
Ooh, you're so right. You're so right.
That's what it's all about. Hey, conflict.
We're just Socratic seminarying it up in here.
Period. No, you're so right.
No,
That's exactly what
I'm
we're
always
doing.
here to listen. It's all good. I mean, we've talked about Viktor at length, so I'll probably skip on Viktor. But Caitlin being raised with immense privilege, being very sheltered, being very naive. The police are here to protect us from the bad guys kind of mentality from a very young age. Her looking up to one of the enforcers at a very young age. That scene where we have that flashback where she's shooting. Where she's like mentored by Grayson and has like a pep talk with her or whatever. And then meeting Vi, actually going to the Undercity, seeing the real people that are apparently so dangerous, and realizing however briefly, how Piltover has failed them. How Piltover has failed the Undercity. And then going through this immense grief after her mom is killed by Jinx, trying to justify her anger, gassing people with poison, again, always wrong, and her guilt aligning herself with what's comfortable. Going from a point of understanding and then pointing the finger and being like, you're the reason why I feel like this, it's your fault, and I'm gonna basically like fuck over the entire Undercity because of it. Aligning back with those original ideas that she was raised on, that comfort. And I think Caitlin's identity crisis that she kind of goes through is important to discuss when you do talk about her character, that like she does kind of get it initially, but the minute that her comfort is endangered, she kind of immediately walks back on it. And then I do agree that I think she really struggles to kind of reckon with that again.
So true. This is a tricky thing for me to talk about because it's an issue for which the internet has very little sympathy or nuance. But like the response of the Jewish community after October 7th, 2023, I see so much of that like rage and frustration and anger in Caitlyn, in that, you know, people took what happened so seriously as if it had been their mother who had been taken hostage. And in Caitlyn, you see how that rage like leads a human to do unspeakable, inhumane things. And as an outsider who sort of divested myself from that ideology, it's fucking harrowing and shocking to watch because you see people sort of making decisions that you didn't think they were capable of making. Like Caitlyn almost gets Scrooged in season 1, where she gets taken to the Undercity and shown like, this is how people live. This is the suffering they've been through. And then she chooses to gas them anyway. And
It's
it's so reprehensible.
Yeah.
it's very interesting because I think that she is the lesson she's learned when she goes to the Undercity is that so much of the violence and so much of the violence from the Undercity and people from the Undercity is a response, is a reaction to the oppression, the the enforcers' violence, the people that they've lost, the way that they have to live. It's a response to that, and she finally sees it from like the first hand. And yes, her mother is taken from her. What she did before was sympathizing with that response of violence, but also abhorring it and holding it like within her judgment. She responds to violence with violence. And it's very interesting parallel how she's like, well, I understand where they're coming from, but it's bad. But when I do it in response,
Yeah.
it's okay, it's
It's
justified, it's a means
justified.
to an end. It's a means to an end. But what end? Is my
Right.
question. And why are the people from the Undercity who are fighting for their freedom, for their life, and have been doing so for it seems like decades at this point, why is that same like understanding, sympathy, empathy not afforded to them? And it's a very us versus them, but it's also understandable in a way. I can sympathize because sometimes when you are hit so directly with grief, anger,
Yep.
frustration, you become a version of yourself that is not who you are. Now,
Yep.
do I think those things are forgivable? No, but I think it is a very interesting statement on her character and who she is overall that she would resort to those actions. And as much as we see her feel guilty afterwards, she never really apologizes or does any sort of like reconciliation
Reparations.
or
Yeah.
reparations with any
They
of it,
live in they live
which is
in her big fancy house at the end, or in Vi, like,
yeah,
yeah.
Yeah.
that's disappointing for me. It felt like she got to a point of understanding and then was like, okay, that's good. I'm
Yeah.
comfortable here with
Yeah.
just my, Zonite girlfriend. I have friends who are from Zon,
Yeah, yeah,
and
my girlfriend's from
I
Zon.
donate to charities which are totally not tax write-offs for Zonite children and hospitals
Oh.
caused like by the grade that I released on. You know what I mean? Like
Oh
it
my
feels
God.
very like, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Yeah, and
Mm-hmm.
her mom, her mother's like life's work being like trying to find a ventilation system to conceal the gray and then
Yeah.
undoing all of that work in one go.
Her and Jinx's like are very much narrative foils, and I think that is
Yes,
very
oh, big
interesting
time.
because Jinx does the same thing with Silco. When Silco dies, she loses it and tears down
Yep.
everything that he ever stood for. Now, I'm saying Silco is a bad guy and
Yeah.
generally does bad things. He's bad, but it is very similar. Two sides of the same coin, inextricably bound. They are very much narrative foils, and I think that's definitely something that I've always loved within the show is
Mm-hmm.
her and Jinx's how they are, um,
Yeah.
how they're reflections
I
of one
think
another.
both of those characters, their narratives sort of also speak to like the power of inherited legacy and
Mm,
what happens when you inherit this legacy that's so entangled with power and violence from, you know, someone who you love and respect, and like what that does to you as a human being. There's a lot of conversation around like reparenting yourself and you know, divesting yourself from the shit that your ancestor did that was bad shit, and it's all over Arcane too,
yeah.
you know.
Oh my God. Yeah, parents. What is so undoing? Is there anything as undoing as a daughter? I'm
Speaking of
losing it.
just really, again, really briefly, which probably won't be brief. Just the same thing with Mbessa and Mel, where she had to divest from her mother's violence, but at the same time, I will say this: I am very critical of Mel and her actions because she does represent like big business. She's the wealthiest woman in Piltover. That was
Yep.
said in the first episode. But what she does with that wealth is not what we would see a good person doing with her wealth. And I think that people get very defensive because they want to defend her as a character because people can be like, outside of the vacuum of Arcane. People are racist and sexist, and that's
Right.
completely understandable that you would want to defend these characters. But these are well-written, complex female characters, and in order to enjoy them, you must criticize them. And
Period.
when we criticize, it's very interesting to see Caitlyn, Jinx, and Mel divest from their parents, reject them, but also seriously mess up in their own ways while doing so. Specifically, Mel, she walks away from the violence. But in a way, money, power, privilege is violence. And she does contribute to that violence a lot without physically interacting with it. But it just, they make mistakes too. They're not just better than their parents. They're different, but they're human, which is very interesting.
I feel like Arcane, I mean, this podcast, which has already been 2.5 hours recording, can perfectly represent that.
Nothing better to
Arcane
do than my finals, so
But Arcane is like one of those products that is, and one of those shows that is just like a media analysis, like gold mine. I feel like there's
yes.
so many things, not only in terms of like how we talk about power structures in storytelling, but also like within certain characters and themes. There's parallels, there's foils, and a lot, or I shouldn't say everything is connected because there is some disconnect as we talked about in the second season. But there are a lot of things that are connected, and there are a lot of things that ring true throughout the entire show: Easter egg symbolism, parallels, etc. And I want to talk about any ones that you guys have seen. I have like lists as I've gone through. Can we talk about Viktor and Jayce yet? About all of the
Oh, I love them. I hate them so much.
like
You
them
guys don't understand.
them both like saving each other from killing themselves multiple times. They believe in each other more than like anyone else around them. Literally, like Viktor literally dying as like Jayce is fucking someone else. Like
Oh my god.
those scenes being spliced together, I was losing my mind.
That scene is so genuinely good. I also think it's very it's like supposed to show their like rift where exactly they come apart, and Viktor gives himself to the hex core while Jayce gives himself to Mel, which is also very, metaphorical with him. Jayce like giving himself to high society versus Viktor giving himself to this cure, this magic that he's pursuing. But I drew this parallel a little bit earlier where Jayce is in the ravine and he's like dying and desperate. And it's funny to me because those scenes are also spliced with Echo and Heimerdinger having the time of their life, which is the
Yes.
funniest thing in the world. I've watched that scene of Jayce's hammer falling on him about 400 times now because I'm a
That's my
sociopath when it
favorite
comes to
sequence
that.
in the second season. I love that sequence. It's
So
so
good.
good.
Yeah.
Definitely something there about the weapons that Viktor begged Jayce not to build, becoming the catalyst of his disability,
Yeah.
and then also being the thing that he disassembles in order to create a brace, an assistive device, which they, in the 10 plus years that they were working together,
Could have made.
never ended up creating
Yeah.
other than in his dire need, which,
Right.
sorry, Jayce,
Ironic.
sometimes is very difficult to love, even though I do love his character. He is an idiot, even though he is incredibly smart. I just think that, as they grow up, they definitely come apart, but then at the very end come back together again. And I think so many of their experiences are so similar to one another, but I also find it very interesting how many parallels Viktor has with Mel. And I've said this in a
Yes.
more recent TikTok about how Jayce fell in love with the human embodiment of natural born magic, Mel, and then also the embodiment of man made magic, Viktor, in my opinion.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
That's
they
true
fell in love.
Yeah.
and rich.
Yeah.
They're both very intrinsically flawed people. Like again, Viktor with his pursuit of science and the arcane, but also I like to think that themes of addiction, deterioration, mental health. Mel, her pursuit of business and empire, but also her struggle with, divesting from her mother. I also think is his name Singed? Or what is that man's name? I've never heard it
Yes,
said out loud
I think
before.
it's Singed with a D.
That's
ED.
wrong to make his face look like that and
Yeah,
then
that's
give him
really
the name
fucked up.
Singed. That's just like
Yeah.
diabolical.
It's like
Yeah.
a
Just like,
J.K. Rowling type
yeah.
name convention.
It's like they would call me Wheels McCain and
I'm
like
screaming.
you know what I mean? My Hogwarts house would
Yeah.
be Slytherin.
Yeah, they were
Oh
wrong
my
for that one.
god. Holy shit.
Sorry.
Not the
Oh,
J.K.
Yeah,
man.
Rowling name.
No, but
oh
it's
god.
like be like that though. She's like
Bless
that.
her.
Yeah.
But at the same time, there's parallels with, Mel rejecting her mother and then Victor rejecting Singe, but also coming together, working with them. There's a lot of parallels between them, as well as like direct parallels in their in the animation. So it does frustrate me when you have writers and people in general being like, oh, they can't be read as romantic. I think it's very obviously written that they could be both, and it's in order for like the greater audience to just chill the F out because they had them kiss at the end. Riot, like people who play League of Legends would be ready to fist fight. But I love their characters, and if you go into the parallels between him and Mel, especially that scene where he's in the ravine experiencing all of those things, when he sees in the fire Mel turn into Victor,
I was literally just
that
gonna
for
say,
me
like,
is one of
come
the most
on.
damning scenes in the whole thing. It's very obvious that he's not only going through physical like deterioration, but also mentally, he's putting things together. He's like regretting and realizing what he's done. And when he comes back with a single determination to undo everything. He comes back to kill Victor, but also rejects Mel almost immediately and
Yeah.
goes in on her about using them for hex tech. Um, and I think people are have mentioned the discarded black girlfriend trope when it comes to Mel, but I personally don't see that. I think you could argue with Sky, absolutely. Mel has always been her own character. Mel has always been able to stand on her own away from Jayce, and she's never been Jayce's girlfriend. That has
Right.
never been the
Like,
narrative there.
yeah.
They hooked up once, and it's implied that they're sort of together, but it's never stated explicitly, like through their mouths. They never say, I love you. They never have like real romantic, tender moments that are not alone in moments of crisis. And I think it's very obvious, at least in the second act, that he is just done in general with people manipulating him and guiding him. He takes a very much like a lead on everything, which he didn't before. He listened to other people. I think that's very interesting where he kind of reconciles the two characters in his head. He still has feelings for both of them. It's very obvious. But when he comes back to work on his own against what they were doing, which I think is very interesting character development there.
I think it's so interesting. So, to borrow your metaphor of like in the bubble of the show versus outside the bubble of the show, I think it's so interesting how like these micro decisions about what happens in narrative, even though we've sort of like so I've been saying this whole time that Arcane is set up as a world where like race and gender don't matter as much the way that they matter in our world, and like that's the conceit I think that the writers are trying to posit. But then also we see contemporary market-based assumptions about race and gender and what kind of things audiences want to watch get mapped onto what happens in Arcane. So like
Mhm.
the fact that we assume that audiences will riot if the two main characters who are dudes kiss at the end because their core gamer audience is so homophobic about men, but it's cool when the girls do it because it's like, yeah, hot lesbians want to fuck and we're happy to see that.
Right.
Yeah,
That dynamic is at play because the
it
creators are
absolutely
thinking
is.
about the audience. And so like there's like this meta thing going on. And I think the point about Mel is interesting too, where she gets to be her own character and all these things, but also she is the discarded black girlfriend a little bit. And like that's the kind of narrative that we expect about black
I
women.
also
Bessa gets totally, she gets her comeuppance.
nerfed at the
That's
end.
kind of,
Mhm.
yeah, she gets nerfed. That's kind of what we expect about black women in power.
Mhm.
And so, it's complicated, I think is
It's
what I'm
difficult
trying to
because
say.
as much as we want to talk about it as if it does exist in a vacuum, because in a way it can, it also doesn't. And the things that people
Yeah.
project onto these characters is very real and very like it does have an impact on how the show is viewed. Again, I brought up the discarded black girlfriend trope because I think that's not now I've seen some of my mutuals talk about it, and the way that they talk about it is very intelligent. I've seen a lot of people who are in fact not a part of that community speak on it in a way that's like, it's very obvious that you see Mel's character as an extension of Jayce, and
Yeah.
you always have.
Yeah.
And that's where I think that trope comes into play. Is it the discarded black girlfriend when you see her trope, when you see her as an extension of Jayce that he discards? Yeah. But if you see her as her own, which at the end, Jayce dies or disappears into the ether, and Mel becomes this fully realized mage who goes to lead Noxus, and it's implied that we will see her again. So I think that it's again within the bubble of the show. Do I think it's the trope? No. However, people watch the show and they have thoughts and feelings that nobody can control, and so I think that it definitely bleeds into that territory. And I also think that people get very frustrated at shippers, specifically with Jayce and Viktor, because
Mm.
we do, I say we, but not me specifically, we as a royal we, have a history of being really deeply obnoxious about female characters
Yeah.
within
Yep.
that dynamic, especially women of color. And
Yeah.
I understand the defensiveness and the anger there. I do get it. But I also think that because, again, within the vacuum of Arcane, it's doesn't have anything to do with race and gender. I don't know. I think people assume that Jayce's relationship with Viktor is very different from his relationship with Mel because they're different races, different gender, and Viktor's disabled. But I think the parallels there are supposed to make you connect the dots that, like, oh, these things don't have as much of a weight as you might think they do. Jayce loves both of them. That's
Yeah.
Yeah.
whether brotherly love and romantic love, or just romantic love in general, or something that transcends either. I think it's very obvious that the man that wanted to give magic to the world fell in love with magic within these two people, and their abilities, their race, the face that they put out to the world has little to do with his emotions toward them, at least at the very
Mhm.
end.
And the other half of that TikTok was your comment being, leave some for the rest of us. Christ.
What?
Oh my god.
No,
Which I adore. I adore.
greedy, greed.
Greedy!
It's
Biblical
ridiculous.
amounts of greed. Biblical.
That's the.
Truly.
Somebody said 6'2" buff, little spoon, and a bottom. That's the kind of greed they talk about in the Bible. I've been thinking about that tweet for like a month now.
Oh
Oh
my
my god.
god.
That's
All right.
too fucking funny.
All right, I got another parallel for you.
Yeah.
So we have Silco and Vander, who, oh my god, I love them. But Silco
so good.
representing water and Vander representing fire. Of Silco, we see Silco the first time we see him, he's this underwater lair, this very like, mustache twirling villain lair,
Yeah.
underwater. Him being almost drowned by Vander.
Mhm.
Almost drowned to death. His sort of baptism and rebirth that he talks about with Jayce, the water that let the weaker man die. This similar sort of baptism that he gives to Jayce to kind of have her let go of her past. He is laid to rest in water, and he kind of embodies these aspects of water, of him being sort of constantly shifting pieces. He is very manipulative. And also, Vander, his, twin flame in this, is almost always wearing blue in his youth and in his good AU. I don't remember in the original universe if he's wearing blue, but he's wearing blue in every other universe. On the other side, Vander, being a little bit more brutish, he's associated with like pure strength, very, very fire based, a little bit more aggressive. His anger shown in his Silco's his betrayal of Silco. He's very passionate about those he loves, and that manifests in physical ways. His bluntness with his intentions. He is the first to die. He first dies in fire. The first time he dies is in that, like, the reckoning of that lair. Raised again as Warwick, and then sort of like dies again in that lava before being raised again. And Silco also being dressed in red throughout the entire show. And I'm just like, I love shit like
There are
that.
some really good themes there. I wanted to point out just a couple of things that with their dynamic is very good and is very like all of those things. They're very like textual, but then you have things like Jayce and the Forge and his colors being red and gold, and then you have Viktor and his colors being more cool toned, and then you have strength being associated with fire and the color red or pink in Vi's case. And you have Jinx with the blue.
With the blue,
But then
yeah.
in the alternate universe, you have her blue, just a little bit of pink.
A little
And I
pink
think
for
it's very
Vi.
interesting It's coming back to me now. Hold on.
Color symbolism is like
Symbolism. Thank you.
it's
Jesus
one of
Christ.
the oldest, well, it's like it's one of the oldest literary analysis
Yeah.
tools that we have
Mhm.
as people. And like one of the coolest things about Arcane is that every frame is a visual masterpiece.
Genuinely.
And that gives them so much license to tell stories with powerful visuals, and like color and elemental symbolism are just run rampant throughout this piece of media.
Specifically when it comes to strength being associated, like Jayce, fire, red, by like physical violence, but also physical like protection of those around you. And then with water, blue, Viktor, Jinx, Silco being a little bit more manipulative, having to move in the shadows because of those physical weaknesses, not being as strong as other people, being fighters
Mhm.
that are from a distance. And then Echo being green
Yes.
and
Green.
a sea of red and blue. That's what I wanted to talk about, is that I don't think he represents physical strength. I also think he represents the other side of it, which is the manipulation, moving in the shadows, doing whatever it takes in order to gain power, like Silco. I just think it's very interesting that red and blue are very, very prevalent throughout the entire thing. But then you have these like shots of green, and a lot of time they're associated with Echo. I just think it's so interesting because he is something different, something out of the
Mhm.
norm. I just think the color represent it's just so good. I think
Yeah.
there's so much to talk about. I could go on forever.
Mm-hmm.
His being the tree, being time, being all of these things, just amazing.
I'd love to talk about time. I want to talk about time. I want to talk about Heimerdinger and Viktor and Echo and all of them having this relation to time, of like Heimerdinger being the oldest character in this story, and always talking about how like research takes time and not to rush anything. And then on the other side of that, you have Jayce and Viktor being like, well, like Viktor's dying, like we don't have the time. And
Exactly.
you know him helping like Echo's creation with like literal time travel. Like there's
Yeah,
I think the three of them, there's an interesting conversation to be had about like how precious time is and how some can take advantage
exactly.
of that. And
Yeah.
Others can't.
Well, and they all also have very different understandings of like the flow of time in human history and like what your role is in the flow of time. Something that I think is true about Echo is that he's a little bit of like a self-sacrificing kind of guy. He sees himself as part of a whole, and not so much as an individual. And I'm not saying that's like a super duper healthy thing, but it does kind of give him this orientation to progress that feels more gradual, and that gives him an advantage in terms of like thinking about progress as, something that when done right takes time, because research takes time. This is a thing that they pound into you when you decide to become a grad student. Academic research has a long timeline. It takes people fucking forever to say what they have to say. And sometimes that's very frustrating because like the world needs answers now. But also it's important because sometimes you accidentally end up creating a medicine nuke that makes robots that destroy the planet. um just to like pull a little smidgen. So, but like Heimerdinger and Echo sort of have similar orientations to the flow of time, where they're able to sort of see it as long and come into acceptance that like their role, they're one little blip in the very long arc of history,
I
which
think
is a very hard thing to come to terms with as a mortal being. You're like infinitely aware of your own mortality at all times, and like I don't fault Viktor at all for struggling with that, because he's actively dying, and that is, that's lived experience that like neither Echo nor Heimerdinger have to confront. And in a way that makes them both sort of incredibly privileged to be able to sit there and see themselves as connected to, the great long arc of progress, because they don't have immediate medical circumstances that are pulling them out of that reality.
Victor's desperate, like his villain arc has genuinely always been tied to his desperation for more time.
Yeah.
It's always been like, I don't even think when he was being Jesus in the commune, like that was entirely him. I think it was his desperation to like do something,
yeah.
and that was what he could do. As much as I could go into Viktor, the things that he's done, the mistakes that he's made, the people that he's hurt, because he has. But most of it, all of it, was unintentional until like the very, very end when he had lost so much of his humanity. But I think as a disabled person, and as a person who has lost so much ability that they could not work, go to school, even leave their bedroom most days, I have a unique understanding of the desperation that you get to at that point. If I was Viktor, the things that I would be doing would be crazy. I completely understand where he's coming from, although again, his actions are not forgivable. But I think the pursuit of progress and the way that everybody goes about that differently is kind of the overarching theme of Arcane in general. And for Viktor, that progress turned out to be something horrific. They're all chasing progress. It just paints them in different ways. Heimerdinger has all the time in the world, and Viktor has none. And even though they have very similar goals, they go about it in a completely different way. And even though Heimerdinger is very understanding, more understanding than most, he completely dismisses Viktor and just says,
Yes.
often the people who burn the brightest also burn the fastest. And that kind of disregard, I think, drove him to things that he would never have done before,
Yeah.
which is understandable. Not forgivable, but understandable.
Yeah. And that's what I like about Arcane is that, like, to a point, and you can justify certain characters' actions, and some I feel like you can't really justify, but I feel like to a point it makes sense why people did the reprehensible things that they've done, or the questionable things that they've done, where it's like the way that it's written, and I feel this frustration with a lot of pieces of media where I'll look at something and I'm like, well, why didn't they just do that, or like, why didn't they just do that, where I feel like in Arcane they showcase the characters, their motivations, their personal ethos enough, even if they're not doing the right thing, it does kind of make sense why
Makes
that character
sense.
would make those decisions, and it makes sense in the
Which is why
story
it's
even if it's not what you want to see.
so difficult sometimes to condemn their actions, because it brings you along with them and you're like, well, if I was in their position, I might have done the same exact thing,
Mm-hmm.
which is a very interesting way to perceive it from.
Yeah. All right. Whew. That was a lot of serious chat. Do we want to head to the unserious corner? Is there anything else that we want to chat about?
I'm all good.
All right, fuck yeah. Let's talk about
Yeah.
ships, which has never been controversial or serious at any point.
Oh, never.
Never.
Never. I've never gotten
No.
a death threat.
So,
No one has ever gotten death threats over ships.
I want to talk about JayVik
Oh my
first
God.
because I feel like there's just the most content with that ship, which is
Oh, I
crazy to
love
say
them
because
so
it's
much.
oh god, I love them so much.
In all timelines and all possibilities, only you can show me this. I literally
That sounds like two
rolled out of
bros.
bed onto the floor and
Gay.
just freaked out.
Oh,
I saw
That
gays.
monologue
I said gay.
was the most insane shit ever,
so
especially when
beautiful.
I was expecting Jayce to put Viktor down,
Right.
like the CEO in the street. I genuinely was so shocked when he was saying, you always wanted to cure what you thought were weaknesses, your leg, your disease. Um, but they were always like a part of what made you beautiful, these imperfections. I don't remember the whole
You were
quote.
never
That
broken, Viktor. There is beauty in imperfections. I lost it, bro. I lost
Yeah.
it.
as a physically disabled person, I genuinely have never seen that level of like open love for a disabled character. Like specifically
Yeah.
about the disabilities off all the time. You get, well, you're beautiful despite it, despite it, despite it, despite it. And it's like,
Yeah.
actually, I'm beautiful because of it, with
Yeah.
it,
Yeah.
all of it.
Right.
Even if it's not beautiful itself, it's a part of me. It's what
It's
you're
part
getting.
of
You know what I
you.
mean?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think that them giving Jayce that injury in a way was like a coming to moment at the very end. They're very much on equal footing, which they have not been this entire time. Sorry, every time I think about it in any actual capacity, I start to tweak a little bit because
Mm.
I haven't seen this level of like, I didn't expect them to go that hard with it,
Yeah.
and they did go that hard. I was a JayVik defender from day one. Okay, I enjoyed it secretly, but I wasn't like super into it until season 2,
Mm-hmm.
when first of all, it was affection that held us
Oh
together.
my
What?
god. I could
What? a hug.
Break my
It was-
heart. Fucking hell, yeah.
No, it was that was insane. I was and you can ask Jen this. I was screaming on the couch. I was like, "Here's the version.
And it's,
I was-
it's
I was
just
going
funny to me that
crazy. It
so
was-
many straight people are like,
Yeah.
well, that's just, it's not, it couldn't be like that. I'm like, you are not
No.
gay. You're not a gay man. You've never
No,
experienced the trials
Literally.
and tribulations of an MLM situationship that will send you into psychosis. Like that's, I'm watching it on screen.
The yearning of JayVik has been has been from the beginning, from the first this isn't my
Oh my
bedroom, blah
God.
blah blah. When he tries to open the door and Mel catches them. When Mel is very clearly flirting with Jayce, and you see Viktor visibly annoyed by the whole
Upset.
situation, like upset.
God.
Like I can't. It is like we are watching the show with blinders on. Like, what is happening,
the
people?
constant physical like touch with Viktor and Jayce. Like Jayce is a very physical person. He's always has like a hand on his shoulder. He's always hugging him. He's always talking about him. He's always wanting to bring Viktor into the picture. He cares about him very deeply. He's always talking about him.
Yeah.
Even Mel. In most of the scenes with him and Mel,
They're talking about Viktor. They're talking
It's
about
like
Viktor.
very much connected. I specifically the scene. This I kind of want to print it out and put it on my wall just so I could stare at it for like 6 hours. The scene where he's like cradling Viktor's cane or crutch when he's in the arcane
Yes.
jelly,
Yes.
which I've dubbed it,
The sourdough starter.
and he's like, that is such like a raw, amazing scene to me because again, I've talked about how my mobility is they're a part of my body. When I'm not touching them, when I'm not holding them, when I am holding them, when I'm using them, they are an extension of me. And for him to be holding that, and then he ends up like cradling Mel.
Yeah.
Right? But he's still holding the crutch. And there's this point in which
Yep.
she pushes it back to him.
Yeah. Yeah.
The themes, guys.
No.
The themes.
Yeah.
They're
I'm
everywhere.
always on TikTok,
They're
like,
everywhere.
"Guys, the themes."
No,
Oh,
I adore
it's-
them.
It's very I mean it's written. It's not subtext to me,
No.
it's text.
No.
And you're allowed to read it as both queer and not queer, which is I'll listen, I'll take it. Okay, because I've dealt with the kind of queer baiting that is just
Yeah.
I mean, I know
Yeah.
I can assume
We're
you guys know
all-
what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
Oh
But
yeah.
I think
Oh
that
my god.
it's like especially at the end where he gives up his position in Piltover, he gives up fighting, he just sits there and like kind of accepts
His
his
life.
role in this overarching like it's been hurtling towards this point in which he's sitting there with the hammer this whole time and he knows what's about to happen. He stops fighting at the very end. He just wants Viktor to come back to himself. That's his end goal.
I just
And then
want my
deciding
partner
when
back.
Viktor
Like,
tells him to
Yeah.
leave, he says, "We end this together." That is crazy because Viktor had nothing to go back to. What did he have to return to? A jail cell after everything that he's done? Jay still had the entirety of Piltover. He still had Mel. He had all of this to return to, but he didn't. He ended up choosing Viktor at the very end.
he chose him.
That's
I-
love.
And so you can argue with the wall about JayVik.
Argue
I
with
will
the fucking
die
wall.
defending this.
I saw a
You
You
comment.
can view them platonically, but for people that are like you can't view them romantically,
Get out.
we're fist fighting,
Yeah.
and then
Yeah.
somebody's gonna film it and then post it on Twitter, and you're gonna get blasted for fighting a cripple. I'm done with this. I'm so sick of it.
I
I'm
saw-
tired.
I saw a comment that made me lose my mind. I saw a comment that it was like, was it casual when our souls intertwined in the astral plane?
It's those
Great
two guys
question.
cradling each other's heads like that's not gay. I saw it in Arcane.
Guys, it's not gay. I saw it in Arcane.
If any of you had been in a diabolical MLM situationship with your coworker that ended in death and tragedy, you would get what I'm talking about because none of you have
Mm.
experienced that like me.
Yeah.
I guess I'm just the realist.
None of you were in the trenches.
None of you were in the trenches like me. None of you experienced the epic highs and lows of
of high school basketball.
getting
High school
ignored by
football,
an evil
was it?
bisexual man.
Oh my god.
Oh, man.
I can't. But I do want to talk about Mel and Jayce because I feel like fundamentally like their relationship, because I do think like you're right, Jayce has love for both Mel and Viktor. I think that that's very clear throughout. Jayce has a lot of love to give. He has two hands. Why not both? I
Sorry, I just got that.
but I think like like Mel fundamentally, as you were talking about, like exists independently on her own, has her own like person in richest person in Piltover, very influential counselor, beautiful, smart, like strong, all of these things. Where I think
What does she have in common with Jayce?
she uses him.
What are their
He's a tool
shared
for her.
experiences? What are their shared history? It's very interesting to me that people get
Yeah.
very defensive about people who are critical of their relationship, especially when I'm already saying, like, actually, I do understand why you would ship them, and if you ship them, totally valid. But
Right.
here are very real criticisms. I think people get very defensive. In the show, they are not. I've made a video about this that actually blew up, and people were trying to kill me in the comment section. And you're gonna try to explode me with your mind all you want. It's not gonna work. Mel and Jayce are not written super romantically. It's not a love story. It's a story about two people who have fallen into each other, but they definitely like move apart, and they also have very different interests and very different motivations. I think it's kind of silly that people get very upset about wanting them to be together as a couple when in the show, textually, they don't work. One of their last conversations is them snipping at each other. He ends up saying, you will never be a passenger. But it's a very non-romantic exchange. I feel like sometimes a man and a woman are on screen and people are like romantic. But that's not necessarily the case. There's actually other stuff going on around here. And politically and economically, Mel, her actions, her history, her character, that has an effect on the overall story. And a lot of people want to pretend that it doesn't and that she's perfectly a good character. She's not a good person. None of them are good people. That's kind of the point of Arcane, is that you can't justify every single action that these people have taken. So yes, I'm very critical of the relationship, especially near the end when they admit that they were using each other and that they've grown apart, and then people are still willing to go to war for it. Which, listen, if you're willing to, absolutely go ahead.
Shipping wars will never die. They will never die.
No,
there will always be someone just on the other side fighting.
Cupcakes.
Yeah.
I just think we're so used to, as a society, seeing proximity to power as like number one relationship determinant, because that was the function of relationships in society for so many thousands of years, that sometimes people struggle to deconstruct that for themselves.
Yeah.
I just think that's real interesting. That's the only thing they have in common, is proximity to power.
Yeah.
It's very difficult because there are a lot of different intersections here. But I do think that Viktor being disabled has something invisibly disabled. They're like, well, he would never pick Viktor over Mel, which isn't always what we're talking about, but it is something that people bring up very often. Like, oh, it's Viktor, and then Mel, who's this beautiful goddess, gorgeous, flawless being, which, yeah, she is. But Viktor's disabilities and his the way that he appears does not make him less than. I'm sorry, it does.
No,
really.
And also from an animated standpoint, let's be real. Mel and Viktor, easily the most lethal face cards in the entire fucking cast. Are you the cheekbones that could cut glass? Are you fucking serious?
It's insane.
Lethal. And yeah, biblical greed from Jayce.
I just think that Viktor and Mel ship together, and then we can figure out Jayce later.
Yeah.
Done with the shipping wars.
Yeah. Jayce is
that, or they can share. You know what I mean? Mel gets weekends, Viktor gets Tuesdays and Wednesdays.
They'll figure it out. Personally, I like the readings of them as a polycule a lot.
Yeah, those are fun too. I love that.
I really enjoy that reading.
Yeah.
It's stupid and like not entirely text supported, but sometimes fan fiction be that way, and that's what makes it fun.
Yeah.
I love like analyzing media. I love taking it apart. I love looking at the text. But the thing is the relationship I'm in, I go talk to my boyfriend about it. He's like, I think they should all kiss. And I'm like, you know what?
You're right.
I agree with your boyfriend. I think they should all go kiss too.
These characters that have never even met, they're in love.
They should. They're in love. They're doomed lovers. Yes.
I think that's the best part about fandom, and I wish there's a time to take it seriously, but there's also a time to just have fun.
That's why we have this corner. That's why we have the serious and unserious corner. That's the whole point. Because sometimes we just want to be silly, goofy, and then sometimes you have to talk about systemic oppression. Speaking of which, we need to talk about CaitVi as well.
Yeah, we can't do this podcast without talking about Caitlin and Vi.
Oh.
Here's my thing.
I think it
Here's my
started
thing.
out so
mean,
strong. I feel like
CaitVi.
CaitVi started out so strong,
It was
and I
so
had
good.
such high hopes.
Here's my thing.
Go.
As queer lady who has made a lot of big swings on this podcast about enjoying toxic Yuri, this takes it a step just a smidgen too far for me.
Yeah.
Season 2 rolled around and Caitlyn asked Vi to put on the badge and then got fucking mad at her for being on the fence about it, and I was immediately I was like, I'm out.
Yeah.
And part of that is because like there are versions of this kind of ship that so there are things about Caitlyn and Vi that are satisfying. I think to a sapphic audience, there's a little bit of that like different worlds, enemies to lovers
love
thing that can
that.
be very
Yeah.
satisfying. We love that. We love the small angry one, strong one who's stupid and a little bit no better than a man. We love that dynamic. That's really fun.
Yes.
And if you like that dynamic and you want to see it done with a female audience in mind, read the Lock Tomb book series, because that's
the
the
second
dynamic
plug
of
we've
this
done.
sort of like central ship of the. I literally I will fucking be plugging the Lock Tomb until I die. The intersection between the Lock Tomb and the Arcane fandom has been a rich source of cultural production in the past few weeks, because there are some similarities in CaitVi to a ship in that book that just the vibes are similar. But the difference, I feel like, the big fat difference to me, is that first of all is created with a queer female audience in mind, and Arcane, I really feel like is not. It thinks about its queer female audience a little, and it gives us things in the portrayal of CaitVi that feel very sapphic. I felt like the sex scene was very sapphic, and I appreciated that. It didn't feel like really male
Like it was for
gazy.
men.
Yeah.
Right. It didn't feel like it was for men, but at the same time, their relationship is so entrenched in the logics of empire
Yeah.
that I fear for Vi. I'm like,
The
girl,
problem,
what are you doing?
Yeah.
Like,
the problem is that a lot of the relationships, when you go outside of the vacuum of Arcane, yeah, they can be considered problematic, but within the vacuum, it's like it's fine because of the dynamics. With CaitVi, inside and outside of the vacuum, it's weird.
Yeah.
It's definitely
is
problematic. It's
weird.
definitely a huge
It's so
power
weird.
imbalance. I've hesitated to speak too much on it because, again, I identify as a queer man now. But the thing is, once upon a time, I was a 15-year-old angry lesbian who wanted to kill all men. I get Vi. I do relate to her very heavily, and a lot of her experiences and her traumas and growing up in the Undercity. I do understand her perspective. I think I could have gone along with CaitVi. I mean, the first season, I think that was wonderfully done. I have no notes.
I was on board
Yeah.
during season
No,
one.
season
I
one
really
was good. It
was.
started out strong.
What would have been better, in my opinion, I think a lot of people's opinion, is if they met in the middle, which was I think where the narrative was heading. But then Vi just kept scooting further and further and further and further onto Caitlyn's side, and
Yeah.
at the end, they end up in a silver palace, in a mansion in Piltover. No mention of what's going on in Zaun, how they're going to help Zaun. Like Vi spent 7 years in prison, being
Yeah.
beaten by enforcers for no reason. I don't I think it's very out of character for her to ignore everything that she's been through, everything that her family has been through. Her friends have been killed by enforcers. Like they've been put down their entire lives. I wish we would have gotten a 30-second montage of Caitlyn taking off the uniform, putting the badge in a drawer, and then them shacking up in some house close or apartment or whatever closer to the bridge.
Yeah.
Because that is very metaphorical in terms of like I feel like Vi just gave everything to become Caitlyn's girlfriend,
I agree.
and then Caitlyn becomes fully realized as this enforcer, and we're supposed to sympathize with everything from her perspective when we've been shown that Vi's perspective is incredibly important when it comes to this. And then people were saying, "Oh, that friend who's too woke," because people were like being like, "I don't like the dirt under your fingernails" quote. But there is like that quote to me, it is like that was weird. That was really
Speaks
weird.
volumes.
Yeah.
Speaks
Yeah.
volumes about
That
how
was really
Vi
weird.
thinks about herself. It
Yeah.
was
Yeah.
really weird, and I didn't like it, and it left me feeling bad and weird and upset. And
In like in the
yeah,
living room that Ambessa the Warlord was all up in, like in the room that Maddie was in before she tried to kill you, like that's where y'all are shacking up
Yeah.
and
Oh,
yeah.
staying.
yeah.
That's
Oh.
so outside of Vi's like
Yeah.
character. I just feel like they didn't have enough room for her in the second season,
No, this
which is
to me
disappointing.
was another one of the big disappointments. Especially because like you do get at the very end that beautiful expression from Jayce of his love for Viktor.
Yeah.
And
We
all
know
you
you know
get
how
with
to
Kate
write
and
it.
Vi is
And
Vi
the dead end
saying,
of your
Kate,
fingernail.
is Vi saying, Kate, I don't fucking care.
Yeah.
And that's it, you know, like that's,
Yeah.
and
That's the resolution.
Yeah.
this is not to me a beautiful sapphic love story. I found it
No.
upsetting. I didn't like it. If you like it and this is your favorite like toxic Yuri and you get somehow
Respect.
great
Mhm.
pleasure out of watching this, respect. I dig it for you. There are
It,
other pieces of media that do this kind of dynamic, and Shira, freaking Shira and the
Oh,
Princesses
God. I
of
love
Power.
Shira.
Same dynamic, very similar dynamic between Shira and Katja, but they do it a billion times better.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's
yeah.
I don't know. There's more. This is my issue. This is my issue with the lack of lesbian representation in media, is that there's so little of it. I
And there's
think
so many
that
lesbian cops for some reason. Sorry. Just like what
yeah.
the
No,
hell?
you're
Done with
so
that.
right. Lots of
There
lesbian
were
cops.
actually.
It's
Yeah.
there
Weird.
also, I feel like on TV lately there have been a lot of black cops, and it's their sort of way of getting around putting a
Yeah.
cop on the show.
Oh, it
Often
pisses
the
me
cop
off
is a
so
black
bad.
the cop on Only Murders in the Building is a black lesbian. This speaks volumes.
Oh my God.
But like it just, to me, I feel like we deserve better. I was
Period.
very disappointed. I loved season 1. I was very disappointed by season 2. We deserve better.
The
That's
good
it.
news is in Finch canon, none of this ever happened. It
Yeah.
all ended very happy.
Yes,
So
and fanfiction
yay!
also. This is what's great about fanfiction. Okay, my sapphic fic writers out there, please fix this for me, and then send me your fix because I'm upset and I need you to make it better. Okay, that's it. You've got your homework. You've got your
Fix it
assignment.
fix
Okay,
what
great.
Caitlin does reparations.
Yes.
Yes,
Perfect.
please. I would
Fix it
read
fix
that.
with
That
a
would
no.
make me feel better.
Yeah. TimeBomb.
Oh yeah.
Yep.
This was up there. So that the episode in the second season that takes place in the alternate reality without Hextech is my favorite episode for a lot of reasons.
So good.
So good.
But like in part because of this romance that we get between Powder and Echo, the disc drop with the Stromae song fucking
So good.
crushed me.
Yeah.
That song, yeah,
I think
I
their relationship is like very interesting because it is it's a comment basically on how like trauma shapes your life. It
Yeah.
shapes
Yeah.
who you are. It shapes the way that you interact with the world. And our Jinx now, I don't think could ever be. I mean, not ever, but like she just is not interested in men. She never shows any outward like interest in anybody actually because she's
Yeah.
so involved within her inner world. But you know, Powder and the other world, she's interested in like career. She's interested in inventing. She's interested in Echo. It's just so it's so sad to see how things could have been if they went differently. But I also think it's very important to show that, like, yes, trauma does that to people. It will,
Yeah.
like,
Yep.
it shapes your entire personality, your outlook on the world, your mental health, your relationships. And that's why it's important to address it when you're young and not
Yeah. I've
let it
talked about
fester.
this. I've talked about this at length on all of my platforms. I've talked about you know, my experience with like sexual assault and being a sexual assault survivor and like my trauma associated with that and how so often we are fed this narrative of like what doesn't kill you makes you stronger and how that is a bunch of fucking bullshit and how genuinely the reality that most people aren't comfortable grappling with is that trauma basically just makes you harder to deal with. Like trauma
Yeah.
affects your relationships. It affects how you go throughout the world. For me, it made me incredibly cynical and distrustful of people. And I mean, obviously, like, survivorship looks different for
everyone,
everybody,
but I
but
think
Mhm.
like this, I think very clearly, like you said, like what trauma does to you, and if you are able to either completely live without it or address it on a systemic level, like, I mean, the bettering of their lives is so dramatic, like, and that's by design, right? Like, it's
yeah,
it's a really, it just punches you in the fucking gut. They're doomed by the narrative where they could have been
yeah.
Yeah.
happy, they could have had it all. It is debilitating. It's, oh god, it hurts. It hurts so bad.
Well, and like the way that they sort of frame that story in the broader narrative, the we've talked about this already, but the interspersion of the sequence of Heimerdinger and Echo building the thing with Jayce like fighting his way out of the canyon, it just sort of like it brings it back to like policy in a way that I think is so interesting because like you start to think about like, oh, this all of this, we could have had all
We
of
could
this.
have had
All
it
of this
Instead,
for
all.
we
one
have
little
that.
thing,
Yeah.
Yeah,
right?
this thing that we think of as like inconsequential and we think, oh, it's just the way the world is. But if we didn't have it, the world would be completely different. And like
Better.
when people are, you know, beating down on those of us who are like constantly advocating for systemic change, this is the thing we're advocating for. Like we are
Right.
Yeah.
not to be like hyperbolic about it, but like we are advocating for the world where Powder and Echo can have that dance
Mhm.
because that trauma never happened. And like we are
Exactly.
advocating for a world where more people can live their lives that way because, you know, we have not allowed human greed and fear to get itself to such a crazy place that like we don't get to have nice things.
Mhm.
So like really all activists are here for is to advocate for us to have nice things. And I think that episode did such a cool job of like illustrating that in a very like emotional, beautiful way.
Shows
I
what
also
Echo was
love
fighting for.
Yeah.
I love the moment where Powder's on the floor and she sees Echo sort of shape shift into the future version of like the version of him from the, and she sees what that person looks like. And
Yeah.
that's, and she's like, and you can see how terrified she is about
Literally have chills
that.
as you're
Like
talking
how
about
fucked
this.
up she is about that. And like,
Yeah.
this is why I love fucking It's a Wonderful Life. I love all these pieces of media that like allow, or like sliding doors that allow us to like get a glimpse at like how the world could be
Could have
different.
been.
Yes, how the world could have been or how it might be if we don't fix our shit.
Yeah.
Moral of the story is I'm not sad that the billionaire CEO got Ebenezer Scrooged. Because like those are the moments where the sliding door shit starts to bleed into our reality, you
Yeah.
know.
Moral of the story: more.
More.
Again, probably one more movie.
Moral of the story is you're not trapped in your reality. Even the little things you do that you think aren't important have the ability to change the way that other people experience the world, and that
Moral of the
rocks.
story is that cartoon type villainy in our corporations and in our empire will create cartoon vigilantes who are leaving bags of monopoly money as they trails and carving.
Everything's connected, y'all. Everything's
It's
connected.
all.
It's all
Amazing.
connected, just like Heimerdinger sings in his little song.
Period.
Oh my god! I saw like open mouth, dry heaving. I thought I was gonna puke because my boyfriend first of all was like, "Is this Gregory Alan Isakov?" I go, "No, I don't think this is Gregory Alan Isakov."
I was like,
I knew it was him immediately. I was like, this
Oh
is
my God.
who knew Heimerdinger could sing?
I didn't know until it showed the furry little bastard on the screen with that banjo shredding. I was like, "There's no way."
Oh my god, I was freaking. I was like, get
man.
Noah Khan on the track. What is this? This
Right?
is
I was like,
great.
"You could have been doing this the whole time. Instead, you were up in Piltover doing what?"
Yeah, doing what?
I've been releasing no-con like bangers this whole time, and you were just.
Man, this is why we need artists. We need artists because not all academics have a Noah Khan in them.
Oh.
We need artists to be that person.
It's true.
Yeah.
Any other ships, or should we go to the supporting character love fest?
I'm good.
Jayce and me. I'm just throwing that out there.
We know. Finch,
Anything's
Finch,
possible, guys.
Finch, we know.
What? What? Okay. Other than that, no. I don't
Oh
have
my
it.
god, I love you. I love you. All right. All right, so this is supporting character love fest. This is the corner where we pick supporting characters to love on related to the theme, in this case the show that we're talking about. I have two and they're both villainous or villain sided. First is Silco. I've talked about Silco on my page a lot. I think he is so deliciously complex. I
Oh
love
yeah.
the writing of him. He is just like so clearly like a bad guy
Oh
with
yeah.
you know, with genuine love for his daughter and wanting to create a better Zahn, if albeit by villainous means. I
Mhm.
love how he haunts the narrative in season 2. How like he's just
Yeah.
he's dead. He's not around. He's you know, but he still manages to create such a profound impact on the story
Uh-huh.
despite being gone, despite being dead.
That montage of the Chem Barons, like
Oh,
him disappearing
ooh,
and then it all going to
that
I
whole
watched that just
sequence,
over and over and over again because it's so good.
the sucker
And it's a
sequence is so
Powerful.
very
good.
good storytelling. The way that one of my friends was complaining about how many like mini music videos they put into Arcane. I was like, no, they're just trying to cram so much information in it
I
and
agree.
give it to you instead of like just sitting there and talking and just like
Yeah.
dumping exposition. They're giving us little music videos, which I'm grateful
That was
for.
wise.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, that's also
Mhm.
like that's the media of storytelling. That's what you have to do in
Mhm.
TV shows and in movies. Like
I was
it's
like,
not a
sorry, but
book.
you're wrong.
Sorry, but you're wrong.
Sorry, but your opinion is bad.
Your opinion
It's
is bad
called a
and you're stupid and you're dumb.
montage, actually. You've never heard of a montage?
Yeah, what the fuck? But yeah, I also love at the end that like or throughout season 2, Jinx is calling out to him. And despite her having like visions throughout season 1 and some parts of season 2
Yeah.
and her being bombarded by these voices that she wants desperately to get away from, the one voice that she does want to hear doesn't reach back out to her until when she's at her absolute lowest at the end of season 2 and she's in that jail cell and he finally reaches back out to her and there's no scratches, there's no distortion. It's just him
Mhm.
with the little hex tech in his eye and he tells her to break the cycle and to walk away.
Uh,
And
uh,
oh my god, I love it. I love
that part was very interesting to me
yeah.
because Silco's character up until this point, you would not think that is something that he would ever say. And I
No,
do wonder sometimes if that's like a Jinx
just her
projecting
inner
onto
consciousness.
this image of
Yeah.
her dead father figure, trying to tell herself something. Um,
Yep.
I do also think it's interesting because you don't see a lot of that. You don't see a lot of the like wild canon character. Like usually they go out in a blaze of glory, which is what happened to her technically. But I think it's very interesting that at one point she was done and she was under like understanding the harm that she was causing. And she also understood that because of the way that she is, she would continue to cause harm. And in a way, she was trying to subvert that. Now, I don't think killing herself was the answer, but I do find it very interesting that throughout this entire show, she's been so willing to kill at any moment
Mm-hmm.
that she would just give that up, give up her life that she's fought tooth and nail to keep in order to stop
Yeah.
what she views as a cycle of violence on her part.
So good. So good. But yeah, so
So delicious.
it's so delicious. I love Silco, and then the other character I picked was Sevika because I just need to talk about Sevika. And a quick shout out as well to all of the Sevika cosplayers. Ooh, you are all so talented and so gorgeous, and you have kept me so well fed on my For You page. You are all doing incredible work,
Oh,
and I
so
want to just
good.
a big thank you to all the Sevika cosplayers who have made my life and improved my life significantly. There's so many. When that scene in the first season where she is talking to Vander, and Vander's talking about like he gets that that call from the enforcers that like they need someone to blame for this, and Sevika
Mhm.
walks out on him and he
So good.
it's so good when he goes, "Do I look afraid?" And she goes, "No, you look weak."
You look weak.
I screamed. And at that point I think Sevika is very much seen as like an antagonistic force because we like Vander, we like the
Yeah.
kids, we want them to be protected. But I saw that scene and I was like, "Oh, this is going to be good. Like this is
Mhm.
going to be I'm really excited to see what she does."
Sevika was the best supporting character throughout the entire show.
Yeah.
Just her interactions with any character that she came across were so genuinely interesting to me because you don't know her intentions or her motivations until she acts.
Yeah.
And even then, you're kind of tasked to puzzle out why she acted that way, why she did the things that she did. Especially, it's interesting to me with Isha, which is another supporting character that I really loved.
Yes.
Also,
Mhm.
not enough people talk about this, but autistic and nonverbal representation.
Yep.
Hell yes. People are like, oh, she's
Yep.
mute. Oh, she can't talk. No, she's autistic and nonverbal. That's quite clear to me, at least. She uses sign to communicate. Jinx's and also Sevika's relationship with Isha, the way that they treat her, is so interesting to me because these people who are evil and villainous and their goal is ultimately to bring down this government, interacting with someone so innocent and completely like it's just so interesting because you don't see these characters in that context in any other point.
I love her.
Yep.
I love her stepping up after Silco dies and like her and Jinx like working together and protecting Isha and their little family pod for a hot minute, like being like kind of
Uh,
happy and
Fanfic
oh,
now,
I know.
fan
Yes.
family, everyone lives,
I
no
s-
major character death.
I saw a really cute fan art and it was Sevika making breakfast for Isha and for Jinx and then Jinx being like, I'll just take my breakfast in my room and Isha being like telling her to sit down. And then like them like eating together, like kind of in silence, but like
Oh,
as a little happy family, and then like Jinx like kind of thanking Sevika and Sevika being like, I mean like you're welcome, I get whatever. Like
what
them
do you mean
being
fan art? That happened in Finch canon.
it's
Finch canon,
so
that's
good.
real.
It's so good. I'll send it to you if I can find it again. Um
Please.
but yeah, I love that she becomes a council member, whether or not that ends up in any like real change. I think, but I think
Mhm.
regardless, just the idea of Sevika, who's kind of seen as like this salty lesbian, like sitting down and
Oh,
like
it's
making
so good.
decisions and like being very vocal about how she feels. I think is
Yeah.
imagining those scenarios just like makes me laugh. Like I
Yeah.
adore her. Also, every
I love that
time.
we've also
Go ahead.
all decided that Sevika's a I don't think we ever get. Do we ever get confirmation that Sevika's a
Doesn't she
lesbian?
have someone on her lap? She says
She's a
like,
brothel
Does she?
scene.
I'm there.
Oh
Yeah.
I
yeah.
think
Oh,
it's
you're
in
right.
an
You're right.
Unless
episode
Yeah.
in the
So she
I
is.
brothel.
imagine that.
No, I
The
don't think you
lesbians have
did.
claimed
But
her.
like, I was just thinking to
They were like,
myself as
she's
you were
ours.
talking,
Yeah,
like,
yeah.
she's a lesbian, but why do I think she's a lesbian? I don't remember. And I love that. But really, what it feels like is that she has that like totally butch lesbianness about her, where she's like decentered,
Yeah.
people in
Men.
power, including men.
Yeah.
It's so funny.
And she's hyper capable.
Yes.
She's so fucking capable. And like, if you need
Oh.
something done, ask a butch lesbian. And like, Sevika fits into that mold so clearly. I didn't
love
even have to
her.
remember the brothel scene to be like, yeah, she's a butch lesbian.
Yeah. Yeah.
Also, like a lot of people don't include her technically, but she is disabled. And something I love about
Yes.
Arcane is that a lot of times media does this thing where they will remove an arm or a leg from a character, and then they'll give the character a mechanical arm or a leg or a magic arm and a leg. And it completely cancels out the disability part of the disability, the way that they interact with the world. She only has her arm half of the time. And the other half of it, it's like this gigantic claw thing that she can barely control.
Yeah.
That is very much disabling. It showed that she cannot swim. She has trouble. She can't fight and hold Isha at the same time she has to run. So that kind of casual representation of disability is it's just so delicious,
I love
especially
her.
with queer characters because we've decided that she's a lesbian.
Yeah.
It's so important. Yes, yes, brown queer women can
Mhm.
be disabled. Like it's
Yeah.
really kind of crazy that people joke about like intersections of, you know, minority groups, and I joke about it too. Sometimes I'm like, no, I'm not a person. I'm just six different minorities stacked in a trench coat. Because I really do hit a lot of intersections. I got the disabled, queer, trans, POC. It's like all over the place, and but it's like these people exist in real life. I'm right here,
Yeah.
but it doesn't seem like such like a crazy amalgamation of identities because we're people, and I think that was done very well in Sevika's character.
Also, whenever she loses an arm, someone dies in
That's
the
really
show.
funny.
So
That's
That
really
is
funny.
funny.
first time she loses an arm, Vander dies. Second time she loses an arm, Silco dies. Third time she loses an arm, Jinx dies. Just, other little things.
Hmm.
I love that. So good.
Yeah.
It's like Chekhov's gun, but it's
Chekhov's
Sevika's
arm.
His arm.
Amazing. All right.
Oh, man.
Those are my supporting characters. Feel free to carry on. I've been chatting.
So I was gonna talk about Heimerdinger for this section, but I feel like I've already talked about Heimerdinger a lot. So instead, I'm gonna talk about Isha, and specifically the Sevika Isha Jinx family, as like something that was very meaningful for me to watch as a queer neurodivergent person who wants to be a parent someday. Because so much of the discourse around parenthood and like taking care of little kids is that like if you're queer and you're disabled, you shouldn't do that because you'll be
Exactly.
bad parents and
Mhm.
you'll be bad at raising kids. And like the beautiful thing that we get to see in this pairing is like this neurodivergent kid who, you know, in any other circumstances might have been ridiculed, misunderstood, you know, discriminated against from within their own family, is met with so much understanding and care from these two disabled women because they
Exactly.
get it. Because they get it. And I just like fucking let that be a lesson to everybody. And like, you know, at the end of the day, what's so tragic about this is that like they take their eyes off this kid for 1 second
1
and
second.
she does something dangerous and gets herself killed. And that's so heartbreaking and upsetting, and like says so much more about like maybe like raising children in a war zone is just dangerous, and like let's
It
not make it
is
about pathologizing individuals, and let's make it more about like the social
the
structures that came
society.
together to create this shit, you know?
Mhm.
They're no worse as parents than Vander was. You
I was
That's
know,
about to
no,
say
Vander,
literally. Yep.
who also
Yep.
had, you know, a horrible thing happen where his kids wound up in a war zone, a bunch of people got killed, and everyone was traumatized, you know?
Yep.
So like all I'm saying here is that I appreciate this, and also that like Isha does so much for the narrative in season 2 with so little, and
Yeah.
is just like so impressive to me because they had to cram so much shit into this season, but like
Yeah.
giving Jinx a reason to live
Yeah.
and having that reason to live be this innocent little person who's just trying to be a person. And like part of what Jinx really struggles with, I think, is like the reparenting of herself, because she was kind of a weird little kid and was not allowed to be
Oh,
a
for
weird little
sure.
kid, and was like, you know, in a lot of ways I had canon Jinx as an autistic character as well, because of the way that she's always behaving wrong as a kid and is sort of constantly getting told like you're fucking everything up. And for her to get to like actively confront that reparenting, I think that's what gets her to the point at the end of the season where she can have the conversation with herself, and the part of
Exactly.
her that is Silco is able to say to her, you gotta
She's
divest, you
different
Gotta
after
gotta
walk
she
get
meets
out
away.
of that.
Isha.
She
Yeah.
is different. Isha
And
changes her
Yeah.
forever.
Yeah.
And I
because it
just
holds up a mirror to
yeah.
her for the first time in forever. She is able to
Mm-hmm.
see herself clearly through Isha because I mean, I understand that as an older brother, sometimes going through things at like a very young age, especially trauma, and then you see your siblings or just young kids in general at that age doing the things that they do, and you're like, holy shit,
Yeah.
I was a child.
Yeah.
I was like a
Yes.
little baby child,
Yeah.
and the things that I did during that period were as a little baby child going through a ton of trauma. That changes your perspective
Yeah.
just
Yep.
completely.
Right, because
I think it's
Yep.
also,
because like you can handle it because like you're you, but like that's my little sister
yeah,
or like that's my little brother. Like
exactly.
that's different. Like
Yeah.
Right.
I 100% agree.
It's also it's
Mm-hmm.
easier to blame yourself and to hate yourself for
For
things that you
sure.
did at a younger age. Now, Jinx, it's so obvious that she hates herself for what she did to her family. Like that's
Mhm.
her overarching like trauma, guilt, all
Yeah.
of that. But like when she sees Isha at that age, so young and innocent and on her own and capable of so much destruction as we see, because kids
Yep.
are capable as
Yeah.
so much destruction, even as little
Yep.
kids. It's like, is it is it fair to blame them when they have no experience, no nothing? Like she's able to, I think, in forgiving her younger self, address the person she has become, which
Mhm.
is
Mm-hmm.
very interesting. I think about
Yeah.
that. I can't talk about Vi and Jinx for too long because I'll start crying because
Yeah.
sibling stuff is so
Yeah, big
real.
time, big time.
It's
I
as
feel
you
you.
grow up and you grow apart and you experience stuff and you become
Mm-hmm.
different.
Mhm.
It's so odd. And whoever
Yeah.
wrote them definitely has some sort of tragic sibling situation going on because it's too relatable.
It's
Yeah.
very real. I almost said tragic supporting character. Supporting character to love on.
Oh
I feel like we
God,
covered a lot of them, but
we covered most of them. Special shout out. I know they're enforcers, but Loris and Seb, I just thought they were pretty.
Yeah.
And actually, shout out to that one character because if I don't mention this, Cass will lose it. My boyfriend. That character, which we only see a little bit of, he's playing the piano as Jayce is giving his speech about
oh
going to
yeah.
war. When he like says goodbye to the piano, closes it, puts on the uniform, ends up taking up Loris's place, and then
Yeah.
is changed after that. He doesn't say a word whole time,
Mhm.
and I think Arcane is so good at like giving us characters that don't say or say like one or two things and then telling their story just by context clues.
Yeah,
Another
visual
supporting
storytelling
character
is
who
crazy.
I like was we see that bartender guy who he's a little dopey and he has short brown hair or black hair and he's talking to Jinx and Jinx is like plays a prank on him or something. We
Calls
see
him
him at
like
the very end
Brian or
throwing a
something.
Molotov,
Yeah.
Molotov cocktail and like fighting for the Undercity. I just think that's so lovely. I love the Jinxer with the blue hair that we see getting
Mhm.
beaten on in the beginning. She ends up dying for the cause later. That father with the piercings, we see
Mhm.
his family fleeing and we see him die. It's just so well written. And I think that them introducing all of these little characters to show them dying is important to the narrative because it's supposed to show like emotionally impact you in terms of war. People were talking about how Loris's death was so sudden and unaddressed. And I was like, that's death. That's
Mhm.
what happens when
Yeah.
bullets are flying and you're in war.
Yeah.
People
And
die.
there's bodies
Like
everywhere.
people get
yeah.
caught in the neck and then they're just dead. Your best friend who is standing right next to you, they're not a person anymore. Like it's very realistic. Now, was it very realistic? No. But in terms of like getting rid of that character so quickly, that I actually appreciated because
Yeah.
it definitely was like he was there for you to get minorly attached to, only to cut him away from you because
Mhm.
you're supposed to be experiencing what Vi and Jinx and all of those other characters are experiencing, which is lost.
Fuck
Also,
yeah.
hello, cat.
Hello, cat.
You say hello to the kitty.
Hello,
Oh, she's put her claws in
kitty.
my leg.
Hello, kitty.
Hello,
Hello.
kitty.
What are your thoughts on next tag?
Aw. Do you have
Thoughts on the
thoughts?
hex cart?
Do you have
Thoughts
thoughts
on the
about
hex
hex
card?
tech? She says no thoughts, only deductibles.
Only deductible thoughts and deductibles.
Thoughts and deductibles.
Oh,
All
it's
right.
too fucking good,
All
man.
right, Finch, my lovely. Where can the people find you? All your plugs.
All right. I'm pretty much Blackbird Quitter everywhere. On YouTube, I just made a YouTube channel called Blackbird Quitter. It has all the vowels. In all of my other handles, I'm Blackbird Quitter, but the Blackbird doesn't have any vowels. If that's any way to explain
Oh,
a username.
I've already got your TikTok handle underneath, so we're
Okay,
good.
thank you.
We got you.
Yeah, I'm gonna wait till winter break to actually start creating any content on other platforms because I am swamped right now with finals. But I do want to continue this. This is the most fun I've had in so long. I love making content about media and disability and cosplay and all sorts of stuff. So you definitely will be seeing more of me at some point. I'm too annoying to be getting rid of. And thank you so much for having me on. This is a ton of fun.
Of course. Oh my gosh. And you're doing merch, right? Talk about your merch stuff that
Yes,
you
I
do.
do stickers. So if you are interested in Arcane merch or just stickers in general, art from a disabled college student who can't work full time or pretty much at all at this point, I would really appreciate the help. Also, I'm still working on a bunch of designs. I've designed Victor's crutch sticker. I'm working on the Jayce hammer. I'm also wanted to do their evolved crutch and the evolved hammer. I'm going to do keychains, all sorts of stuff. It's going to be fun. Thank you again.
Of course, yeah. You don't want to miss any of that. TikTok is likely getting banned, so make sure to subscribe to Finch's channel, which, like I said, all of those links are going to be below.
And
Thank
I'll
you.
put links in my bio to my Blue Sky and my YouTube and everything.
Beautiful, wonderful. Thank you so much for joining us. This has been a fucking pleasure. You've fucking nailed it, and we absolutely have to have you back for another episode. Maybe another Arcane one, maybe whenever.
Absolutely.
Because this has just been awesome.
Absolutely. Thank you again to Finch. You are an absolute rock star. And thank all of you for listening to today's Yapfest. Please yap about it to your friends. Until next yap, we'll see you later.
Bye.
Bye.